One of the most universal experiences amongst all humanity are the moments spent gazing into the cosmic time map of the stars. Many have wondered if other life exists. How did it all begin? What does this all mean? These questions drove me to the stars from a very young age, and by grade school, I was already reading college-level literature and everything relating to astronomy and astrophysics. Still, my hunger for knowledge was insatiable. For every question answered, 10 more would sprout in its place. Why are we here? How did life come to be in such hellish conditions? What about space itself? Could life exist out there in the freezing black void? The answer isn't what you'd expect. You have no reason to believe a reason I say, and even so, this message may not reach you at all. But I won't let our sacrifices go unheard. I have to leave a record in case I don't make it back to tell you this myself. I have to try, for everyone back home on Earth, for Dr. Bigum, for Weaver. Our mission was top secret, our purpose and destination unknown. Until just before launch, we were told we were selected to test the first spacecraft constructed for faster-than-light travel. A mythical Alcubierre drive, my mentor and colleague Dr. Evan Bigum, through some miracle of science and technology, had created it. Ever the stubborn mule, Dr. Bigum only reluctantly invited the world's most elite scientists and engineers to finalize the ship's construction, and personally selected the crew from a pool of participants around the globe. Dr. Bigum had been my hero when I was attending university. He had such a fire in his soul for astronomy and would reject all absolutes. When it came to physics, nothing is impossible was his mantra. He would talk endlessly about how faster-than-light travel could be possible, how humanity could harvest the power of black holes and become the titans of the universe. It was our destiny. His passion was infectious, and so I made it my own life's goal to see humanity finally gain access to the stars. Our endless nights and research finally paid off with the creation of the space research vehicle Archium. I was in complete shock and didn't think any of it was real, right up until the moment when I was floating naked in the suspended animation tank, preparing for our 4-year trip to the edge of the solar system. There, our journey would truly begin. Hypersleep, in actuality, was nothing like any movie or program I'd ever seen. There was nothing to keep me warm for the 20 minutes it would take to enter hypersleep. My eyes were bound shut with surgical tape, so my only sensation was the piercing cold of the sub-0 degree water. The pain was excruciating, but the only reminder that I was even still alive. I was sure I would die before stasis was triggered, but in that same second, it finally happened, and I felt the black of space completely take over. For once, I was happy to be asleep. I don't remember a single dream I've ever had, having been an insomniac for much of my life, but I remember the dream from hypersleep. I was lost at sea. The ocean was deep black and was almost bottomless. There was a sky, but its deep midnight purple hue was almost indistinguishable from the Black Sea. The darkness masked the shadows of the many creatures I could sense just inches below my feet. Once or twice I felt what seemed like rows of teeth running ever so softly down my legs. It could have been for just a moment, or maybe an eternity, but without warning or pain, I was pulled downward and plunged straight into the abyss. I didn't dare open my eyes. All I could do was pray for a quick death. The first sense I regained were the waves of warmth that washed over my exposed, waterlogged body. I couldn't see yet, but I could feel my fingers were soaked and rubbery from such a long submersion. Quickly afterward, I became aware of a flurry of voices. Some were muffled and distant, another was close and clearer. It was Weaver, our medical technician, just awakening from hypersleep himself. My eyes opened slowly, and his nearly perfect physique, at even 50+ years of age, was alluring and helped bring my other senses into focus. Without warning, my ears were filled with sharp shooting pain. The blaring alarm overhead quickly forced the remaining fogginess to retreat. I knew this alarm. I had heard it before. It was the life support failsafe system Dr. Bigum and I had designed together. A growing dread replaced the momentary excitement I had only felt seconds ago. I turned over quickly, splashing water everywhere, to see who it was. It was Dr. Bigum. It had happened only once before in recorded spaceflight, but he went into cardiac arrest the exact moment he entered stasis. His heart was now failing without the machines to keep him alive. Weaver was the first to reach him and frantically began performing CPR. It was all in vain, as the all too familiar sound of a flatlining heart monitor were the only things we could hear outside Weaver's desperate pleas. Roberts, the ship's captain, rushed to stop Weaver's endless compressions, knowing it was too late. The next few hours were a haze, as the rest of the crew awakened and processed how to go forward. There was a plan, as there always was. There was no joy to be had logging into the mainframe to assume the title of Chief Science Officer. I had hoped to one day lead my own expedition into the void. I never wanted it to be like this, as the other crew were grieving and dealing with post-stasis recovery. I turned the ship on sector by sector and began plotting our course. That's when I noticed it. It was peculiar at first. I wasn't quite sure what to make of it. I tried to align the ship with Alpha Centauri, but the ship's computers kept failing to plot a course. I knew I was doing everything correctly. My very soul had been embedded into this ship. I knew every circuit and every switch on the bridge. Troubled, I looked out into the expanse of interstellar space that lay right in front of me. My eyes searched for familiar constellations and areas I knew I'd recognize. Once I found one, I tried tracing it back to the spot where I knew Alpha Centauri was. Only I didn't find it. I searched every point in the sky, but no matter how long I searched, I could not find Alpha Centauri anywhere. This was impossible. Surely some kind of post-traumatic stress from the voyage and stasis. And now Dr. Big M's unfortunate passing. As far as our scans could detect, our destination had gone dark. An unease unlike anything I'd experienced crept over me. The mysterious nature of our mission and lack of any details before launch was starting to make sense. Dr. Big M must have known. How many others knew? What else had the doctor been hiding? I said nothing as the rest of the crew silently entered the presentation room. Roberts was doing her best to maintain appearances, but rumors of a romance with the doctor had been floating around for months before our launch. Now, her stark and blank expression was more worrying than normal. "Captain, I need to address the crew." I was shaky and unsure as I spoke. Roberts was a commanding figure within the crew, a no-nonsense stronghold of a woman who could drink me under the table before beating me over the head with it. "It can wait until after the briefing." Her words were stern and cut through the bone. "I'm sorry, with all due respect, but it can't wait. There's something I've just discovered." And Roberts loudly cut me off before I could finish. "That was an order, Blair. Now please start the presentation and have a seat. You may speak after the briefing." Her words were a swift rebuke of my desperate pleas. For me, that confirmed she already knew what Dr. Big M was about to posthumously tell us. Quietly, I obeyed her instructions and started the recorded memos the late doctor had left. His haggard face flashed up on the screen, the deep ridges in his skin prominent, and his hazel eyes looking straight into the camera from behind his absurdly oversized glasses. There was a deadly seriousness to his expression, a rarity for him. Whatever the reason for Alpha Centauri's sudden disappearance, it was taking quite the effect on him. The knot of anxiety and dread that had formed in my stomach was now twisting into a monumental sense of grave danger for all of us. Fellow crew of the Arkham, it will have been my greatest failure should these recordings ever reach you, for it means that my life's work and my journey alongside you to Alpha Centauri have failed. Now I must place upon you the most terrible of burdens. His words dripped with both heartache and a slowly rising fear. I could hear nothing but the labored breaths of my crew as we all listened. "I know you have cleared the Uick cloud and are in the final preparations to perform the very first hyperspace jump using the immaculately designed jump drive of my own creation. You know this to be your primary and only objective, to oversee the first successful faster-than-light voyage to our closest stellar neighbor, the star system designated Alpha Centauri, then return home. This is only half true. The bomb, the one we were all waiting for. Of course, there had been more to this mission than just simply testing the drive. Why else had a heavily decorated military commander with extensive combat experience be made the captain of a scientific mission? I looked over at Captain Roberts and was surprised to meet her gaze in return. Her attention could not be further away from Dr. Big M's posthumous presentation. Instead, she appeared to be studying me, looking for my reaction. Maybe she thought I knew as well that Dr. Big M had already told me before the mission. My confused and puzzled face must have surprised her as she turned away the same second our eyes had met. What you are about to hear is considered top secret by every recognized sovereign body on Earth, though surely by now the citizens of the world are aware of this anomaly. Some of you on this very crew may have already discovered the truth. I could feel 5 pairs of eyes now locked onto the back of my neck, but I forced my attention back to my mentor's confession. 4 years before the start of our voyage, an amateur astronomer reported a strange finding to NASA. It seemed that our nearest stellar neighbor, Alpha Centauri, had suddenly, and without warning, vanished from sight. There was a murmur of conversation amongst the crew now. An entire star system vanished. Impossible, surely a miscalculation. Hearing these words coming from Dr. Big M's mouth, I still didn't believe it. There was no precedent for this. A star cannot simply vanish without a supernova explosion or turning into a black hole, especially not the star that was closest to us. Dr. Big M paused for a few moments, allowing us to absorb the full weight of what his words meant. I noticed his hands trembling, a condition he had kept hidden from most, I myself having only witnessed it a handful of times. They hadn't stopped shaking the entire video. He continued, repeated attempts to locate the binary star system have all failed. Proxima Centauri, the third member of the system, is still detectable, but we have been receiving strange oddities and fluctuations in output. You may remember some years back when astronomers reported similar findings from Tabby's star. Your primary destination is now Proxima Centauri, specifically the region of the planet located within the red dwarf's habitable zone. You will make your initial observations there. A crew of 2 will then board the ship's emergency shuttle, which has also been outfitted with a jump drive, and chart a route to the site of Alpha Centauri. You will record any data there is to be obtained, then report back to the Arkham. If all succeeds, you will then chart a course back to your present location to begin the journey back to the solar system. The severity of your situation must not be underestimated. There is no natural or physical phenomenon that we have ever recorded that is remotely capable of producing this anomaly. Besides, there is something even more disturbing. I've traced star maps from all across history, and there is a direct line of stars that have all seemingly disappeared throughout the galaxy that lead directly to Alpha Centauri. This anomaly, whatever it is, does appear to be spreading. I'm sure I don't have to tell you which system is closest to Proxima Centauri. Also, there is the nature of the jump drives themselves. All you need to know is that they are powered by an extremely volatile engine, and miscalculations and impact debris are high risk factors, so you must proceed with the utmost caution. You are all truly in no man's land now. The doctor took a long pause, perhaps growing weary from the weight of this information. He ran his hands through his thinning, curly gray hair, then took one final look at the camera. One can only hope these files never reach you, and that we will, together, solve this mystery. But if not, if these truly are my last words to you, then Godspeed. With that, the screen went blank, and a heavily uncomfortable silence cloaked the entire room. The one sounds that registered with me were the occasional beeps from the ship. Roberts was the first to speak up. "Blair, you may now address the crew," she said with just a hint of sarcasm. "No need now." Dr. Big M pretty much covered it, I said blankly, still locked into a gaze with the blank screen. My mind was racing over the possibilities, over what could have happened to Alpha Centauri and the other stars Dr. Big M had mentioned. What was more troubling to me was the mention of Tabby's star, which has indeed recorded bizarre fluctuations in light output. Some have speculated that an advanced alien race could be constructing a Dyson swarm around the star, though no solid theories have ever been conclusively proven or disproven. This was something completely different though. Tabby's star was still detectable, whereas 2 whole stars from a system were now entirely gone. Proxima Centauri, a low-mass red dwarf, appeared to be next, but as it was not visible to the naked eye, we would have no idea what we would see until we got there. Roberts took notice of the shocked expressions of the entire crew, and for the first time, spoke with just the slightest hint of concern in her voice. Dr. Big M left detailed instructions for everyone to follow in the event of his death. Does anyone have any questions before we begin? It didn't take long for the first protest to start. Torrance, the ship's pilot, and Robert's second in command, was the first. "Are you kidding me? This is insane. There is no way we can go through with this mission now that we just lost our only scientist. His anger and fear were clear as he almost spat through his teeth. Torrance and I had once both been peers of Dr. Big M before I was chosen to be his assistant. Our already fragile and competitive relationship quickly soured after that, so I didn't take too much offense to his subtle insult. Exactly, we have no clue what to expect when we get there, and now we've lost Dr. Big M. I think we should test the jump drive to get back to Saul. It'd be a far better course of action now in light of what's happened. I was surprised to hear Weaver joining in with Torrance. Weaver had a reputation for being rash and making risky choices that ended up saving countless lives, but now he too was cloaked in the same fear everyone else was. We cannot risk damaging the ship by flying through the Uick cloud. That's precisely why we had to wait until we had cleared it to begin the mission. As you have already been told, there are specific instructions. Torrance cut Roberts off, which was something no one had ever dared to do. The rest of the crew, shocked at his bravado, just looked on as their dispute continued to escalate. I don't care. This is well beyond normal circumstances. Not only is the man who built this ship dead, but this whole mission was also all a lie. I would have never signed up for this if I had known the truth, and I'm sure most of you wouldn't have either. Torrance looked to be out of breath as he finished. He was scared, I could tell. Whatever concern and humanity Roberts had displayed earlier was swiftly replaced with their usual icy demeanor. But you did sign up for the mission. You signed an ironclad contract. Now, of course, I cannot force you to participate. Our superiors are trillions of miles away. If you refuse, however, we will forcibly place you back into stasis until the completion of the mission and our return to Saul, where you will be placed under arrest and stripped of your title, status, and all privileges. I have to admit, there was something provocative and sensual the way Roberts took control of any situation. I could see Torrance beginning to shrink in the presence of such a commanding woman. No doubt the both of them wanted to curb stomp the other. Still, Torrance had never been able to read the room, and so he continued on his tirade. I'd like to see you try. Seriously, I'll fight every single one of you. No one's forcing me to do anything. Torrance was really trying to put on a brave front, but it just shattered completely in the face of someone who was clearly bigger, more powerful, and more intimidating than him. If someone didn't interject soon, this was not going to end well. As Roberts began making a motion towards Torrance, thinking on my feet, I jumped up to place myself between the two. Stop, both of you, this isn't helping. My voice was shaky, and I didn't feel near the confidence I was trying to project. Roberts, taken aback, could only stare at me with her mouth slightly agape. Torrance, however, looked poised to attack at any moment. My feet stood firm though, and I continued. Torrance, I know you're scared. I'm scared too. You heard what Dr. Big M said. This isn't about us, it's about everyone else back on Earth. Screw you, Blair. What else do you know? You had your hand so far up Dr. Big M's ass. He must have told you everything. Torrance was becoming even more aggressive. I knew it was only a matter of time before Roberts forced her way back between us. I didn't know, I swear. I only found out just before you did. I wouldn't have agreed to come either had I known the truth. I lied, hoping Torrance would take the bait. Nothing short of a gamma ray burst would have stopped me from joining this mission. We all signed the same contract, Torrance, and there are 7 billion people that are counting on us, not to mention everything that will be within our grasp once this ship is fully activated. The whole galaxy, Andromeda, the local group, maybe even the entire observable universe. I know you, Torrance, and I know there's no way you wouldn't want to be a part of that. We need you. I stopped, allowing Torrance to absorb what I had just said. His shoulders began to relax, and I could sense his breathing returning to normal. Roberts looked on suspiciously. Well, now that we've all regained composure, we will initiate the first jump to Proxima Centauri in T-1 hour. You may begin your preparations. Dismissed. Roberts didn't stay any longer and disappeared into her personal quarters. Not able to stand the thought of everyone staring at me, I left without a word and headed straight to the bridge to begin warming up the ship. As I mindlessly brought all the systems online, the only thing I could think about was Alpha Centauri. Nothing but titanic darkness lay in the spot where our closest neighbor once was. What could have possibly caused an entire binary star system to disappear? The only real option in my head was some sort of black hole encounter. Maybe a rogue black hole that remained undetected disrupted the system, sending Alpha Centauri and B into interstellar space. Even that remote possibility stretched my suspension of disbelief well beyond its limits. The bridge doors opened, but I didn't register it at first, so the hand on my shoulder was quite a jolt. I jumped back to see Sydney, the most senior astronaut outside Roberts. She hadn't said a word during the presentation and resulting aftermath, but I could tell from her pale expression that she harbored fear of her own. "Shoot, I'm so sorry, I didn't mean to scare you," she sputtered sincerely. Sydney was the exact opposite of Roberts in almost every conceivable way, and in many respects reminded me a great deal of Dr. Bigham. She had joined the NASA space program right out of college, and was the first woman to set foot on the moon at just 27 years old. The subsequent years spent in space had taken a toll on her physical appearance, but her natural curiosity of the unknown had kept her from settling down. "It's okay," I assured her, turning my head back towards the expanse of space. I could sense Sydney was equally entranced by the view before us. Despite our now unprecedented and worrying circumstances, it was still a marvel of technical achievement to be able to see what we were seeing. The countless specks of glimmering light shining from hundreds and thousands of light years away, a living time capsule of an era from long before our own. "Is everything ready?" Sydney asked half-heartedly. I could sense her unease. It was cold and familiar. "Yeah, just waiting for the rest of the crew to join us before we begin charging up the engine." It felt hollow just saying those words, as I had no idea what was even powering this ship. Dr. Bigham had cherished my devotion to him and his dream, but for some reason hadn't thought it prudent to include me in every aspect of its construction. This had infuriated me before, but now it only fueled my growing discomfort at having to fill in his shoes. This was truly a case of the blind leading the blind. "What do you think happened to it?" Her voice trembled. "Alpha Centauri. I have no idea. I have my theories, each one more implausible than the next." I finally turned to face her, but she kept her gaze forward. Sydney's almost ruby hair fell into curls all the way down to her neck, framing her narrow face. Her eyes looked glazed over like she was seeing beyond space, beyond the cosmic horizon. "I don't think I want to know. Whatever it is, it can't be good." She was definitely right about that. The rest of the crew began filling in one by one, with Roberts being the last to join us. She was still trying to hide her pain behind a wall of emotional indifference, but smeared eyeliner betrayed her true heart of hearts. I felt for her and admired her supreme courage. Torrance, however, made his contempt well known, rudely brushing past me as he made his way to his co-pilot chair and refusing to acknowledge anyone in the room. Roberts made her way to the front of the bridge before stopping to gaze into the abyss. I wondered what monsters, if any, gazed back onto her. "Blair, are we ready to begin?" she asked blankly, not even looking back at us as she strapped herself in her chair. "All systems are online and ready," I replied. "Torrance, have we aligned the ship with Proxima Centauri?" Torrance let out a reluctant yes with as much venom as he could muster. "Good. Begin the charging sequence, Blair." My fingers hovered over the buttons needed to trigger the charging sequence. This was the moment we had all been waiting for. We were about to engage in the first faster-than-light voyage to another star system. This was bigger than the moon landing, bigger than anything humanity had ever attempted before. But more than that, our entire perspective on the universe was about to change in a single moment. It was a terrifying prospect, and I wasn't sure I even wanted to know what awaited us at Proxima Centauri. "Blair, is there a problem?" Roberts asked curtly. No problem, Captain. Then please begin the charging sequence." That had been the first time I had ever heard her utter the word please. Even under the circumstances, I was very much enjoying this less hardened version of Roberts. Without a word, I began the charging sequence. My anxiety was through the roof, and I had trouble staying focused, entering in the wrong sequence of codes more than once. It took close to 2 minutes before the telltale sounds of the particle accelerator connecting from the bridge to the engine room began blaring in our ears. The entire bridge began to vibrate, slowly at first, but increased in intensity as the drive powered on. I looked around me, studying the crew. Some of them had locked their eyes onto me but turned away the second mine had intercepted their own. Torrance's expression had changed from just barely contained anger to outright hostility. Sydney was still staring ahead into space along with Roberts. I only caught a glimpse of Weaver before he turned away, but his expression was one of both abject terror and concern. Concern for me, for himself, for us all. I had no idea. Finally, the charging sequence had completed, and the ship's computer informed us that the jump drive was now ready for initiation. I looked back to Roberts, who turned her head just slightly in my direction. On my command, she said. I took the longest, deepest breath I'd ever taken in my life, then braced my mind, body, and soul for whatever was about to come next. Roberts couldn't have known it at the time, but her next words sealed her fate, as well as ours. Initiate. There was no pause, no hesitation this time, just the flip of a single switch. All at once, the sounds coming from the particle accelerator increased by almost 100-fold. My teeth were threatening to shatter from the intense vibrations that echoed through every part of my body. I could hear the surging discomfort coming from the crew. Sydney had begun hyperventilating and needed oxygen fast, but before I was able to disengage her emergency mask, the jump drive activated. What followed next was an experience that bordered somewhere between pure ecstasy and a living nightmare. From the back of the ship, an enormous force started pulling us backward. For a split second, I was sure I was about to phase right through my chair. Space itself distorted in front of us as our view of the universe contracted and then expanded. The pressure was gargantuan, like being on a roller coaster going 1,000 miles per second. My skin had flattened against my body the way it does when you run your hands underneath an air dryer. I couldn't even turn my head an inch to see the rest of the crew, and the roar of the ship masked any cries they made. Trillions of miles flew past in an instant, closing the gap between us and Proxima Centauri. This was it, our monumental achievement in engineering. Against all odds, it had worked. At first, the space in front of us remained dark and empty. After what felt like only seconds, a pale red dot appeared on the horizon. Proxima Centauri loomed ahead, growing bigger and brighter with each passing second. The ship's computer reminded me to begin deacceleration, and with great difficulty, I moved my fingers over the switch and immediately felt the ship begin to slow down. Just moments later, the entire ship jolted, and sparks began to fly from overhead. Something had impacted the ship. This was not good. A second later, another impact caused another shower of sparks to shower down all around us. Screams from some of the crew, mostly Sydney, reverberated all around me. This had not been foreseen, as there were no detectable asteroid fields along our projected path. Our calculations had been so precise. From over the chorus of voices and screams, I could hear Roberts attempting to give out orders to remain calm, but they fell upon deaf ears. Warning, damage critical, engage emergency deacceleration. That wasn't good. Our shield generator was failing. Blair, engage the emergency stop. Roberts ordered from underneath another torrent of sparks. We can't stop at these speeds. The G-forces will destroy the ship. Roberts protested, but I knew what would happen if I listened to her. We could do nothing. But wait, pray we had cleared the debris field, and stay calm. The ship stopped jolting, and once the ship reached the minimum safe speed, I disengaged the jump drive. The ship lurched forward violently, almost knocking the wind out of me. The structural integrity of the ship had held up, but only just. Multiple systems were offline, and all of our communication channels were down. I unbuckled myself quickly to begin surveying the damage. I blocked out the cries and attempts at Roberts to maintain control. There were more important things to deal with right now. As far as I could see, our storage compartment housing our ground survey equipment was compromised, so there was no telling how much equipment we had just lost. The shuttle was fully operational from what I could tell, as was the jump drive itself, but the backup generators and reserve cooling systems needed to be repaired before we could even think about booting up the drive again. It was when I heard Weaver pushing himself in between Roberts and Torrance that I knew I had to intervene. I shouted for everyone to shut up and listen. As best as I could, I told them what we had to do right now if we wanted to stand a chance at getting back home. The energy in the room changed instantly. Despite the near-death experience and growing feuds, the crew immediately sprang into action. Roberts took advantage of this to assert control, but I could tell from several faces that this wouldn't last long. Torrance and I went to assess the cargo hold, hoping that the breach was small. We were dismayed to find the compartment had been wrecked by the breach. Several small holes had created enough suction to pull most of the equipment to the walls. Sparks were flying everywhere, and from the looks of it, our planetary surveillance rover was in pieces all over the ceiling. We would need to patch the holes before we could enter. Weaver joined us as Roberts watched on from the cockpit. She had continued to bark orders at everyone, but she was losing her cool as most of them had gone unheard or ignored. There was nothing she hated more than losing her authority. I'd done over a dozen spacewalks before this mission, but Torrance had taken it upon himself to almost hand-hold me as we suited up and made our way through the airlock. He was back to his passive-aggressive routine, so that left only Weaver and me to try and maintain the peace. As we worked, my eyes kept drifting to Proxima Centauri, enraptured by its dim red light and dominance of the pitch-black sky. We managed to patch all the holes and repressurize the compartment, not that it did us much good. All of our data collection modules and survey equipment had been trashed, leaving us with no way to scan the planets in the Proxima Centauri system. When we were back aboard the ship, Sydney dropped yet another bomb on the crew. The planet that had been our original destination was no longer detectable, just like Alpha Centauri. And by this point, I'd lost my ability to be shocked. Torrance, in a fit of anger, swung at Weaver as he tried to come in between him and Roberts again. I dove in to try and block him, and ended up getting the full brunt of his fist to my left temple. The last thing I remember is my body hitting the floor before the pitch black took over again. No dreams this time, thankfully. When I awoke, Weaver was standing over me, looking as striking as ever. He smiled at me, a smile I returned in kind. Had our circumstances been different, I'd be resisting a powerful urge to kiss him. Instead, the weight of our situation collapsed on top of me almost instantly. Weaver said that Torrance was in isolation, with Roberts just one click away from placing him back into stasis. As I got up, the wave of searing pain in my temples nearly put me back on the table. Weaver gave me some beautiful pink pill that instantly put my throbbing headache at ease. Roberts wants us all back on the bridge as soon as you're ready, Weaver replied. I silently agreed and left with him at once. When we arrived back on the bridge, Torrance had been let out of isolation, but was still brooding in the corner by himself. I could feel the hate radiating off of him, and Roberts, who looked almost disheveled and not at all her usual self. As soon as she saw me, she walked right over to me and pulled me away from Weaver. Blair, I know Dr. Big M personally selected you for this portion of the mission. However, after Torrance's outburst and the discovery of the missing planets, I'm overriding his directives and will be accompanying Torrance myself. I thought she was kidding at first, but her stern and cold expression said otherwise. With all due respect, Captain Roberts, Dr. Big M stated. Roberts cut me off before I could even protest. I know what he said. I was there. I know how to collect and analyze data, Blair. What I don't know are the ins and outs of this ship, and if something happens to you before the ship is operational again, we might never get back to Earth. Also, there is the matter of Torrance. His behavior is unpredictable at this point, and if he gets in the way of the mission, I'm not sure you'll be able to do what is necessary to prevent him from interfering. She was right. Torrance may have hated me by that point, but I didn't think I was capable of what Roberts could effortlessly do in the same situation, so I silently nodded my head in agreement, knowing there was nothing I could do to change her mind. There was still plenty of work that needed to be done on the ship, that much was true. Sydney and I would also have ample opportunity to collect what data we could from the Proxima Centauri system, and hopefully repair some of the damaged modules. Still, part of me yearned to see what had become of Alpha Centauri, if there was anything else left to see. Roberts asked for a status update on repairs, which I told her were still ongoing, but that the shuttle was up and ready for launch. Torrance made a scene as usual when told it would be him and Roberts piloting the shuttle to the Alpha Centauri system, but was otherwise undisruptive. Roberts then told everyone that once she was off the ship, I was effectively in charge until she was back. I was to oversee the final repairs and collect what data we could. I walked the two of them to the loading dock silently, watched them suit up, then bade them one final goodbye. Roberts nodded her head in return, but I was surprised when Torrance spoke. Good luck, soldier. There was something so stark, So brutal, the way he said those famous last words, though neither of us could have known it at the time. I could only straighten my back and smile in return. The airlock doors slid into place, cutting off contact with my fellow crew for the last time. When I returned to the bridge, Weaver and Sydney were already gone, leaving just the technician Stanton and I to see the shuttle off. It was beyond breathtaking observing faster than light travel from a distance. 1 second the shuttle was drifting off in the distance. All at once, the space around it warped like the usual gravity lensing we see from black holes, but only for a brief moment. Space returned to normal as quickly as it had distorted, and a brilliant flash of concentrated light blasted off across the expanse of black space. That was the moment everything began to click into place. "Come with me, Stanton," I said, and began heading out the exit. I always had a large stride, so I was out the door before he could even respond. "Where are we going?" he asked as he followed behind. "We're gonna see what makes this ship tick." Perhaps curiosity truly did kill the cat, because that was all Stanton needed. He followed me wordlessly as we navigated the labyrinthine network of passageways and chutes to the engine compartment. Dr. Big M had made it known he wanted it to be as difficult as possible for anyone other than him to be able to access this area of the ship, and for all intent and purposes, he succeeded. After what felt like an hour, we finally made it to a long, dark, and narrow corridor leading to the engine room. The door required a series of complex puzzles, almost like a video game, along with the chief science officer's code that was now mine. I almost laughed out loud, realizing how silly and over the top this all was. But that was the doctor, heart, body, and soul. At last, the familiar hissing of the hydraulics sounded that the door was opening. What lay before us was about the most mundane and boring room you could ever hope to find on a ship. Dr. Big M, the troll, was definitely starting to come out. The whole room was white, save for a perfectly round black spherical area that filled the entire middle of the room and dipped significantly into the floor, at least a yard or more. A manual computer station, hidden behind a wall, began unfolding its way out. As we walked into the room, Stanton and I stood in awe, or maybe befuddlement, I'm not sure which. The sphere was a series of segmented plates made of what looked like marble. I ran my fingers over it and could feel it was still warm to touch despite it having been hours since the ship had stopped. I was trying to piece together how any of this made sense when I looked to the floor and saw a series of words written all around the spherical dip. It was the same phrase repeated over and over again. Outer event horizon limit. The pieces began fitting together almost perfectly. The particle accelerator, the event horizon room, the jump drive. It was such a feat of engineering, yet elegant in its simplicity. My mouth dropped just slightly. Incredible was all I could say. What is it?" Stanton asked. "It's a black hole. That's what powers the jump drive. It warps the space around the ship. Then the particle accelerator propels the ship forward. It's brilliant actually. Holy hell, should we even be in here?" Stanton was beginning to sound panicked, and I don't blame him. As impressive as it was scary just how close to an actual potential black hole we were standing. "Probably not, but it's okay. I'm sure it's turned off," I reassured him. "How do you know? We wouldn't be standing here right now if it was. Our atoms would be smashed all over the room." That seemed to calm him. I wanted to explore more, but then the ship's intercom blared overhead. "Blair, Stanton, we need you in the observation room." It was Sydney's voice, sounding garbled and worried over the speaker. We left without a word, navigating our way back to the central hub much faster than before. When we arrived at the observation platform, Weaver and Sydney were off in separate corners of the room. Sydney looked almost startled to see us come in. "What's the problem?" I asked, fearing more bad news. "Well, I'm not sure. It's hard to explain." Sydney was flustered and on the verge of a breakdown. We all were from the looks of it. Weaver sat in the corner, gazing up every so often, but otherwise sat in total silence. When we first arrived, I began plotting out a star map to see what the constellations looked like from here. For the most part, there was little variation. I responded. I wasn't liking where this was going. "Yeah, well, when I was playing back some of the first recordings, I noticed stars that seemed to disappear and reappear almost at identical intervals. I can't explain it. The whole star vanishes, then reappears just as quickly. It's like something is moving in front of it. But if that were the case, not only would it have to be beyond gigantic, but it would have to be much closer to us. Sydney stumbled over her words, as if she herself didn't believe what she was saying. Even after everything that had already happened, this was yet more fuel to add to our growing nightmare. I was about to interject when the overhead intercom sounded again, this time from the ship's automated computer. Danger, collision with shuttle imminent, T-minus 10 minutes until impact. What? Are they back already? Sydney began rushing to the observation deck. We gazed from inside the nearly 2-foot thick glass for the shuttle. If they were adrift without the ability to maneuver, then we'd have to go spacewalk to retrieve it from hitting the ship. But the other possibilities that sprang from this were far worse. What happened to Roberts and Torrance? Why were they back already? Why couldn't they control the ship? We scanned the black horizon for any sign of the shuttle. It was Stanton that spotted it first. There it is, he said as he pointed upwards off to our left. Sure enough, just barely visible. And about a quarter of a mile out was the shuttle, drifting slowly towards us. The outside emergency lights could be seen flashing, but other than that it looked completely abandoned. What do you think happened? Sydney inquired. I don't know. Lever, you come with me. Stanton and Sydney, you both go to the hub and make sure the docking area is prepped. We broke up into our groups and made haste. Lever and I suited up and entered the cold vacuum of space yet again in record time. As soon as we were tethered to the ship, we propelled ourselves to the approaching shuttle. As we got closer, several things became clear all at once, and I could feel that familiar unease dripping back in. The airlock doors were open, leaving the cockpit completely compromised. I scanned for any damage, but so far the shuttle looked to be in fine working condition. Lever entered before me and began locking the doors so we could re-establish the atmosphere and boot the ship's computer back up. I ordered him to keep his suit on, just in case. I had no idea what to expect and wanted us to be as protected as possible. My instincts turned out to be correct. As I was gathering the shuttle's flight recorder to take back with us, Weaver had tended to search the shuttle for our missing comrades. Just as I was removing the shuttle's flight recorder from its wall panel, a commotion sprung up behind me. I spun around to see Weaver now being throttled by another figure in a spacesuit, who I assumed to be either Torrance given his prior behavior. From the looks of it, they had been hiding in a storage locker and jumped Weaver once he opened the door. I reached for the electric prod from my utility belt, but Weaver was slammed right into me by the suited figure before I could, knocking me to the floor and nearly taking the wind out of me. Weaver was short of breath and could only give me a confused, desperate look before he was launched to the other side of the cabin, banging up against the airlock. Standing above me now was the suited figure, whose visor had been pulled all the way down, masking their identity. I motioned to get up, but was slammed back down to the ground by the figure stomping on my arm and almost fracturing it. In its right hand was the utility axe equipped with all our spacesuits. Just as the axe began to swing down on my head, its body began surging and jolting. From behind, I could see Weaver ramming the electric prod into the figure over and over again, but nothing seemed to faze it. Seizing the moment, I unclipped my own axe, and with only seconds to spare, slammed the metal edge into the side of the figure's helmet, shattering the visor, and finally, the suited menace slumped to the floor, me alongside it. For a moment, all was quiet. Weaver, start the docking procedure. I managed to wheeze out. Weaver went to the cockpit, and within moments, I could feel the ship beginning to automatically pilot towards the loading docks. My gaze, however, was still locked onto the now smashed visor of our attacker. The looming form of the faceless, reflective black space suit was terrifying enough, but it was what I didn't see that truly horrified me. I was gazing into the dark space, where the person wearing the suit's face should have been, but there was nothing there. I crawled over to the figure, expecting it to leap back to life at any moment. It lay still as I brought my face inches to the visor, still staring into that blank void. There was nothing. No eyes, no skin, no face, nothing. I reached into the visor, fingers outstretched. The very tip of my pointer finger made contact with something invisible and fleshy. That was enough for me to recoil my hand back and shriek out loud. What's wrong? Weaver had sprung into action at the sound of my distress, hands locked onto his prod. I just shook my head and backed into a corner. The shuttle jolted as it docked with the Arkham, and I could hear the airlock pressurize, and the voices of Sydney and Stanton sound off from just beyond the doors. But nothing could rip my eyes away from the horror of what lay in front of me. "Blair, are you hurt? What's wrong?" Weaver had never sounded more concerned, and it was this concern that finally snapped me out of my daze. The airlock doors opened, and Sydney rushed in, followed by Stanton. "Is everyone okay?" I heard fighting over the intercom. Sydney was surveying the scene and saw the crumpled figure in front of us. "Who's that?" "We're not sure yet. They attacked us both as we were getting the shuttle back to the docking platform," Weaver explained. "There's nothing there," I said under my breath. What do you mean?" Weaver asked as he looked towards our suited attacker, but I could see the flash of recognition go across his face as he saw what I saw. What happened?" Sydney began, but she too saw that nothing was inhabiting the suit. Stanton began moving towards it, but I urged him to stop. I simply grabbed the cord that had tethered us to the ship and began wrapping it around the suit. "What are you doing?" Sydney sounded almost accusatory. "I'm not taking any chances." Weaver joined me in tying up our attacker, and once we were sure it was secure, both of us dragged the suit to the medical bay. Strapped to a table, we tried to break off the suit, but something had happened that had fused multiple parts of the suit and shredded it in other places. We managed to wrangle the helmet most of the way off with one of our axes, though now the sight before us seemed even more nightmarish. Weaver had found some baking powder and used it to spread a layer over where the face of the wearer should be. Sure enough, the form of Robert's face became clear as Weaver coated it with the powder, though her features were warped, and upon closer inspection, her skin appeared to be moving and distorting. I was baffled. The behavior of the suited figure had led me to suspect it was Torrance, but clearly it was not, and now an even darker question loomed. As if he could see what was on my mind, Stanton spoke first. "If this is Roberts, then where's Torrance?" Nobody had an answer. I remembered the flight recorder and grabbed it without a word and turned to leave. Sydney called out to me, but I rebuffed her. "Stay here and guard her, or whatever that is. I'm getting some goddamn answers." I spat out. I was beyond scared, beyond horrified, beyond confused. The events surrounding us were only getting stranger by the minute. Whatever happened on the shuttle at Alpha Centauri, I knew it held the answers we sought. Footsteps sounded behind me, and I looked to see Weaver running up alongside me. "I'm coming with you." "No, please, wait with the others. If that thing wakes up," Weaver cut me off. "Sydney and Stanton can handle it. Besides, I want to know what happened on that shuttle too." I smiled and silently admired Weaver for his natural curiosity and spirit despite these dire circumstances. They walked briskly back to the central hub, flight recorder in tow, and began the process of accessing the data. The Arkham's communication systems were still completely offline, and so we had to upload the data manually. As we waited for the ship to analyze the data from Alpha Centauri, I began pulling up the video archives. Weaver and I watched as Roberts and Torrance took off in the shuttle. As they approached the binary star system, that was when things began to shift. The video files became increasingly corrupted, and Roberts and Torrance faded in and out of a sea of multicolor static. The audio, though corrupted as well, remained audible, at least for the most horrific parts. Roberts was heard over the recorder shouting and screaming unintelligibly while Torrance tried to get her under control. "What's happening?" The ship stopped, all systems down. "Roberts, what?" Roberts looked to be in a trance from the few clips that managed to get through the static. A split second later, she was gone. It was as if she just phased out of existence. "Roberts, where the hell? Roberts, Roberts." The audio cut off for a moment, only to resume with the sounds of horrified yelling and the shuttle's computer systems. "Warning, airlock systems deactivated. Cabin depressurizing in 30 seconds. What are you? Stop. Roberts, what are you doing? Stop. No." The last split-second image we saw before the video cut out for good was of a suited Roberts by the airlock doors, and a frantic Torrance grabbing hold of his seat for dear life before the airlock doors open, sucking Torrance out of the frame and into the void of space. I thankfully looked away before the worst of it, but judging from the look on Weaver's face, he'd gotten a full look at Torrance's rapid decompression as his screams of agony were sharply cut off. The video and audio stopped after that. The silence in the room was deafening. Once more, all I could detect was our shallow breaths as we absorbed the horror show that had unfolded before us. What the hell was all Weaver could muster. A message flashed on the computer screen telling us that the data had been fully processed and was ready. Hesitantly, I moved the cursor to the files, and one by one, numerous screens and charts began loading onto my screen. From what I could gather, as the shuttle had approached the site of Alpha Centauri, long-range telescopes began picking up two small bodies of mass in the exact position of the two stars. Though the temperature readings were cooler than any stellar body detected, and the size of the objects were roughly the same as Earth, they both had a mass far greater than anything a planet could substance. It took me a bit longer than normal to come up with a hypothesis, but once it emerged, it nearly took my breath away. I sat back in my chair, shaking my head in disbelief at what I was looking at. Something that had never been discovered before. Something that shouldn't even exist yet. "That's not possible," I whispered to myself. What's not possible?" Weaver was scared, but his fear was nothing compared to mine. I was silent for a moment more, still in utter shock at this newfound discovery. Alpha Centauri, it's still there, but it's become a black dwarf. An icy chill ran all down my body and back up my spine as I said those last words. What's a black dwarf? I didn't expect him to know what it meant. How could he? It was an almost empty, an unexplored area of the celestial sciences. It shouldn't exist. It couldn't exist. It was a complete impossibility. This was no lie, however, no trick, no deception. The very first black dwarf discovered by man was less than half a light year away. Black dwarfs are the stellar remnants of white dwarfs after they've cooled to almost absolute zero. It's the final stage of all stars that don't turn into black holes. I explained. So what's the problem? The problem is, these things shouldn't exist yet. The time it takes for a white dwarf to cool is estimated to far exceed the known age of the universe. We're talking quadrillions of years here, but that's impossible. Apparently not, I sarcastically remarked, though the humor was lost amongst the tension and fear that had taken hold since the moment I had awoken from hypersleep. It felt like some fever dream, an ungodly nightmare that I kept hoping and praying would end, that I would awake in my hypersleep chamber, that Dr. Bigham would still be alive, on our way to make history, and ensure our names are engraved within science books for all time. Reality had been a cruel mistress, and I had an awful feeling she wasn't done yet. What do we do? Weaver sounded more desperate than ever, though I had no answers to offer this time. I don't know if there's anything we can do, if whatever caused this change has made its way to Proxima. My words trailed off. The mysterious fluctuations in light output, the shifting constellations Sydney had reported. Somewhere, something primordial was awakening. Just as those insidious thoughts penetrated my mind, the now ominous voice of the ship's computer sounded off once more. "Attention, all personnel report to the medical bay. Several crew members have experienced catastrophic injury." The message repeated once more before silence reclaimed the room. Catastrophic injury, I cringed and shuddered at what that could entail. Weaver and I gave one wordless glance to each other before jolting upwards and running down the long corridors to the medical bay. When the doors opened automatically, my eyes were immediately assaulted with a scene of horror I'd only ever seen in movies. I only registered the image of blood coating nearly every surface before the churning in my stomach overpowered me, and I twisted downward to void the contents of my stomach. Though I was sure I caught the glimpse of what looked like a severed arm hanging off a table. Weaver didn't handle it much better than I did, and we both nearly fell backward into the corridor, the stench of iron clinging to the air. What the actual hell? I'd never heard Weaver curse before. He'd remained so composed, more so than all of us, yet it was his breakdown and curse that truly broke me. At the moment, I was convinced none of us were getting back to Earth alive. Sydney, Stanton, Torrance, Roberts, whatever was inhabited her form, was now loose aboard the ship. There's no telling where it could be now. I darted my head, looking down the corridors, half expecting it to come around the corner at any moment. Airlock breached. Warning. Depressurization in loading dock. The blaring alarm and booming voice from the computer barely registered at first. It took Weaver shaking me and grabbing me off the floor to break me free. "We gotta go. Come on, Blair." Weaver was reasserting control, and it was all I needed to free my mind. We both grabbed our helmets and began running towards the loading docks. We turned the corner when the airtight doors dropped down almost directly in front of us, just a few steps further, and it would have split us right down the middle. Ship atmosphere compromised, sealing all airtight doors. From behind the now sealed doors, we could hear the pull of space sucking everything it could into the vacuum. A loud bang came from the doors. Whatever was on the other side, it knew we were here, and it was coming for us. My heart skipped a beat, and I contemplated the entirety of my life and everything that had led to this moment. I was half tempted to throw open the doors and launch myself into space, letting the void carry me away into eternity. Something else was stirring inside me though, a feeling I'd never known before. It felt animalistic and raw. No, I wasn't ready to give up just yet. The fight to survive overpowered my fear for the first time. One way or another, this was going to end right here and now. Thinking on my feet, I called to Weaver, "Put your helmet on, I've got an idea." Weaver didn't question it, and fastened his helmet on just as quickly as I did. We both hitched ourselves to the wall, and once I was in place, I silently looked over at Weaver, now unsure if this was a good idea. I peered deep into his eyes, looking for any sign that I should stop, but he only nodded to me, and that was all I needed to feel that surge of adrenaline again. My heart now racing, and the heat in my head swelling, I took the plunge and deactivated the airtight doors. The moment they opened, the cold vacuum of space roared back to life, pulled us with great force towards it. The suction lasted only a few seconds, and soon the weightlessness of zero gravity surrounded us both. Looking ahead, I could clearly see Roberts, or what she had now become, floating in the doorway. Large chunks of the suit had been ripped off, and now the form that inhabited her remains looked more menacing than ever. There was no warning, no sound, nothing. All at once, the form charged full speed ahead towards us. I braced myself for impact, but couldn't have predicted the force at which it slammed into me. The jumbled mass of ripped fabric and bent metal began lunging at me, doing whatever it could to land as much damage as possible. I reached for my utility axe, but this time it had expected this and ripped it right out of my hands. Its gloved fist started pummeling into my suit and visor, just as I thought it would shatter the visor. As I had done before, Weaver charged in from my side and slammed my attacker into the wall. My head was spinning from the attack, and I couldn't see straight at first. I watched as Weaver attempted to subdue the creature, but with no success. After trying to break his visor with its fist and failing, it tried a new tactic and began slamming its face over and over into Weaver's. I watched as cracks began forming in his visor and knew he only had seconds left. Summoning all the strength I could, I propped my feet against the wall and launched my body with as much force as I could muster towards the airlock. Arms outstretched, I grabbed hold of the suited menace and carried us away through the corridor and towards the open mouth of space. Just before we reached the gateway, the suit twisted around and pushed us into the airlock walls. It started banging its head into mine with such ferocity. One crack appeared, then two, then more. At that moment, I surrendered to my fate. I said a small prayer for Weaver and reached for my prod. This was it, my famous last words, and I wasn't taking any prisoners. With every last bit of energy I had left, I activated the prod and pushed it straight into the open visor and deep into the suit. The suit convulsed, and through the small bit of powder still left on her face, I watched as a look of pure agony was permanently etched into her face. Just as quickly as it began, its arms went limp and the convulsions stopped. The now motionless form drifted slowly backward and through the gateway, out of the ship, and into space. I was becoming lightheaded from the escaping oxygen and quickly closed the airlock doors to re-establish the atmosphere. I tried to stand up, but my body was beginning to crash from the adrenaline spike, so I tumbled down onto the floor as the gravity turned back on. My breathing became shallow, and once again, I was ready to surrender. Though it lasted only half a minute at best, the fight felt like I climbed Mount Everest in a single minute. My heart was throbbing and at risk of exploding through my ribs. The motion of someone removing my helmet and the rush of fresh air now filling my lungs brought me clarity. I looked up to see Weaver's worried but smiling face just inches from mine, and thought at that moment that I'd never seen a more handsome man in my life. I smiled back and laughed. Weaver laughed in return, and for once, the tension and dread that had filled us both was momentarily gone. He pulled me back to my feet, and slowly we made our way back to the central hub. I locked the doors and sealed the windows, though I'm not sure why. They wouldn't do us much good against whatever force of nature lurked just beyond. We both slunk to the floor, exhausted, and unsure of what to say or do next. Weaver was the first to break the silence with a single question. "So what is your hypothesis, Doctor?" He was attempting to be funny, and let out a forced chuckle that I returned in kind. But to be fair, it was a valid question. I'd been so lost in confusion and panic that I never really thought about the possibilities. What had happened to Captain Roberts? Why was she corrupted and not Torrance? What thing had turned Alpha Centauri into a cosmic graveyard? I'm not sure. I think maybe some sort of life form, but big, massive, something that would need an enormous amount of energy to survive. I thought about Roberts and how some part of her remained on that operating table, the way her skin moved and folded. She'd either become invisible or assimilated somehow by this entity. This was the most puzzling of all. What had consumed her? What exactly was this thing made of? Normal baryonic matter seemed unlikely. What were the alternatives? The way it had reacted to the electric prod had been telling. I thought of more exotic forms of matter, such as dark matter and antimatter. We've never observed them before and don't know if they even exist. But if they did exist, and there was enough of it gathered in one place, then there's no telling what could happen. Life sprung from literal hellfire during the early days of Earth. What would stop life from arising from the cold, an empty tomb of space? It doesn't matter what it is, not anymore, I said dejectedly. It was the hard truth, but the truth nonetheless. We sat in silence once more. I'm not sure for how long. Maybe a minute, maybe an hour. The ship's computer, which had comically been the bearer of bad news, had one last omen of bad fortune to give us, and immediately caught our attention. Attention, abnormal gravitational anomaly detected. I jumped up and made my way to the window. Standing as close as I could, I searched. It didn't take long to find it. From afar, space and light from the stars began to warp in odd, undefinable ways. It seemed like the very fabric of time and space was folding and unfolding, twisting the constellations into something unrecognizable. The Arkham was positioned roughly 2 light minutes away, giving us plenty of space to watch the scene unfold safely, relatively speaking, but close enough for us to get a full view of Proxima Centauri's final fate. As the mass got closer, I could see small strands of superheated plasma begin to break away from the red dwarf. I watched in a mix of awe and horror as this monster of the universe began to cannibalize the last member of the Centauri system. The entire scene would have been spectacular had our circumstances not been so dire. Weaver was standing next to me, and all I wanted at that moment was another human to hold, to connect to protect me. Almost on instinct, I reached for his hand and wrapped my fingers around his. He didn't resist. In fact, he gripped my hand in his own. God Almighty, I'd never been a religious person myself, but Weaver's words seemed more than appropriate. "We have to do something," I said, though I knew it was futile, as small and insignificant as we were. What could we do to fight against this gigantic leviathan? There was no force of nature we could harness that would stand a chance at annihilating this thing. Nothing outside a black hole. Only we could harness the power of a black hole. I had completely forgotten about the engine room. It was a lifetime away, even though it couldn't have been more than a few hours ago. "I know what we have to do," I said plainly, my mind now racing to formulate a plan. I explained the engine room black hole generator and how it was what powered the warp drive. If we could pilot the ship into Proxima Centauri and breach the event horizon, that would result in an enormous explosion that should tear apart whatever it is. I was giddy as the plan began to unfold. We might actually have a chance at saving ourselves and potentially everyone back on Earth. "Can we remote pilot the ship from the shuttle?" Weaver asked, and just like that, my moment of glory had already collapsed, and I could feel the color drain from my face. The communication systems on board the Arkham had never been fixed, and now it was too late to attempt any repairs. "We can't, not from the shuttle. We have to pilot the ship manually, which means..." Weaver cut me off and finished my sentence himself. "One of us will have to stay behind." Of course, there was always a catch, a price to be paid. My search for the ultimate questions of the universe was what led me here, and now it was only fitting that I be the one to stay behind. You go in the shuttle, I'll stay behind, I offered selflessly. It wasn't a big deal to me. So many of my questions had been answered, and though so many remained, I no longer wanted the answers, not after witnessing the cost. "No, you go." I expect him to say that. I was just about to refute him, but he stopped me. He grabbed my shoulders softly and looked deep beyond my eyes into my very soul. "Because of you and Dr. Bigham, I got the opportunity to be a part of something so much bigger than myself, something that is going to change the course of human history. It was you and the doctor that got us here, but the people back on Earth still need you. What if there are more of these things? With the jump drive, humanity will truly have the keys to the stars. But that won't happen if you don't make it back. You deserve a fighting chance. You have to go." Tears had already begun to pool around my eyes as he spoke. I didn't want to listen, but I knew what he was saying was correct. There was no guarantee the shuttle would even survive the return trip. It was a miracle we'd even survived in the first place. But the thought of some other abomination hiding in the dark, hungry, and searching for another star made it all too clear what we had to do. I wasn't going to leave Weaver behind, not without telling him the truth. Weaver, I couldn't say it. I wasn't even sure what it was. I'd never felt this way about another human before, and our time together had been so short. It wasn't fair. Why did it have to be this way? He just looked into my eyes the way he did before, then wrapped his arms around me in an embrace. His salt and peppered hair was so soft, and his skin so warm. His voice was velvety smooth as he spoke into my ear. "I know." We then stared into each other's eyes, knowing it was for the last time. It was something I never thought would have happened. It was a small moment, maybe only half a minute, but it was all I needed. After it was over, I looked back up and spoke the last words I would ever say to him. "You know what to do." He only nodded his head. Before I was overcome with grief, I tore myself from his arms and headed towards the exit. As I left, I took one last look behind me. Weaver had already begun strapping himself into the cockpit and beginning the launch sequence. His eyes met mine for one final time. He smiled weakly, and without a word, I turned on my heel and ran as fast as I could to the loading dock. It had become easy to navigate the ship by this point, so I was on board and beginning my own launch sequence within minutes. I watched as the Arkham faded quickly into view, marveling one last time at Dr. Bigham's creation. I still didn't know how he'd created the black hole engine, and had no idea where to start. I could only hope and pray I'd live long enough to find out. I began activating the engine and particle accelerator, then charted a path far out into the Proxima system. I couldn't leave without making sure Weaver had succeeded. The titanic gravitational pull from before was much less intense, given the smaller size of the shuttle, but still strong. Piloting had not been my strongest area of training, but I handled the shuttle easily enough, much to my astonishment. When the jump drive disengaged, I turned the ship back around to face Proxima Centauri, which was now little more than a fuzzy red dot in the distance. The distortions from the entity and lensing effect could still be seen as well, only on a much smaller scale. I waited and waited and waited. After a few minutes, I began to fear something had happened to the ship and was ready to drive straight into the star myself. But then it happened. Without any warning, an enormous burst of light shined like 1,000 burning suns. I shielded my eyes as best I could and waited. There was no sound, no vibrations. I was much too far away to feel anything. But as the light faded, I was finally able to see it happen. The black hole was now sucking in the entire mass of Proxima Centauri into the event horizon, and from the looks of it, the entity as well. The space and time distortions spiked for just a second before warping inwards and towards the singularity. The rest of the red dwarf began to spread around into a bright accretion disk. Before now, Proxima had never been visible to the naked eye, but within 4 years, it would be one of the brightest objects in the night sky. I waited for what must have been hours. I had to be sure. I needed to be certain it was dead. Nothing emerged, no more distortions, no detection of the anomaly. As far as I could tell, it had crossed the inner horizon and was now being shredded down to its most basic particles around the singularity. It was only after I was certain it was gone that I felt the first sign of relief since I'd woken up. They say in space no one can hear you scream, Though unsure if you were listening, you could have heard me crying. I sobbed, screamed, cursed, yelled. It came out all at once. The floodgates opened, and I couldn't close them. Afterward, I sat in the cockpit and just stared out into space. It's always been the final frontier in my eyes, a never-ending fountain of questions, just waiting to be solved. But now I know the truth. Some things aren't meant to be discovered. Some questions are better left unanswered. After wiping the last tears from my face, I began plotting my course back to Sol. Before I was about to engage the autopilot, I thought of the mammoth journey that lay ahead of me. There were 1,000 things that could go wrong. What if the shuttle had been damaged somehow during the assault? What if I died in hypersleep like Dr. Big M? I couldn't risk not leaving behind a record of these events to show the people of Earth what Weaver, Roberts, Torrance, Sydney, Stanton, and Dr. Big M gave to protect them. It will be my greatest failure should this message not reach you. I'm broadcasting on all radio frequencies and sending the message through all channels. My only hope now is that someone, somewhere back on Earth, finds this before they find you. My name is Damian Blair, junior astrophysicist and last survivor of the space research vehicle Arkham, and I'm coming home. Something a little creepy happened to me tonight, so I came straight here to write it all out. I actually deleted my Reddit account a few weeks ago when my favorite mobile client announced it was shutting down due to Reddit's high prices. But screw it, I had to create a new account just to get this all down for you guys. I'm house sitting in a rather rural area, mostly wooded with a few houses here and there, close enough to see but far enough away to be private. I've been here for about a month, and since the owners have 2 adorable golden retrievers, I have to walk them pretty regularly, so I've been getting to know the walking paths around here pretty well. Earlier this evening, against my better judgment, I decided it would probably be best to take the dogs for a quick walk before I locked myself in for the evening. So I leashed them up and headed out. They walked around for about 30 minutes before I decided to call it, and sweating profusely, I turned us around. As we hit the pavement from the dirt path we were on, I could swear I heard someone whistle at me. Not like in a catcalling kind of way, but like someone trying to get my attention or something. The dogs perked up, and all 3 of us began looking around for the source, but I saw nothing. There was nobody around. At first, I wasn't too concerned. Honestly, that could have been anything. Some kids playing in a distant yard. Yeah, maybe. Someone whistling for their own dog. Perhaps. But I hadn't seen anyone or anything out here the entire time we'd been out walking. Maybe it was a coyote. There's plenty of those guys out here. But then again, we didn't see a thing. So I decided, screw it, it's probably nothing, and proceeded walking. But here's where things got weird. There's a long stretch of wooded area we have to walk through to get back to the house. Right as we round the corner to this stretch, I hear the whistle again, only this time, it's louder than before, and it's behind us. The dogs perk up again, and this time, we whip around to see what's behind us. But again, there's nothing. Nobody, not a soul to speak of. And other than that whistle, it's dead quiet except for the breeze. Now, I read a story on here a few years back about the whistling man, and with that image in my head, it became a little more concerning. I bring my pocket knife with me every time we take a walk because you can never be too safe, so I just tightened my grip on it and tried to quicken our pace. But at this point the dogs were more distracted looking around for the source of the whistle, and they were concerned with me trying to hurry them home. And after about 15 feet, we hear it again, and again, and again, louder and following us as we move along the fence line. It's coming from across the street, behind the other fenced-in area, and now it's pretty undeniable that someone is following us, or at the very least, trying to mess with us. The dogs now have their full attention turned in that direction, and they're barking like crazy, while I try to gain control, and once again try to quicken our pace home. This time, the dogs don't really fight me, and we begin to quickly make our way back toward the house. And the entire time, I could hear whoever it was on the other side of that fence, whistling at us as we walked. The odd thing, though, is that I couldn't hear any footsteps. There should have been footsteps. Leaves crackling, twigs breaking, grass moving, something, but there wasn't. So when we finally reached the crossroads toward the house, and off of that stretch of road, I was pretty GD relieved. Finally, we made it home. The dogs drank a bunch of water, and I went upstairs to play some GTA. After an hour and a half or so of some intense business battles, I hear the dogs begin to bark at something out the front window. Normally this wouldn't be too concerning either, considering there is a lot of wildlife around here, but after my experience walking them earlier, let's just say this put me a little more than on edge. So I whip off my headset, grab my knife, and walk down the hallway to the stairs overlooking the living room. All of the lights in the house are off, and the dogs are standing at the window fixated on something out front. Being the ninja I am, I use the darkness to creep down the stairs and over to the side of the window, hopefully unseen, to take a look outside. Scanning the field out front, there's nothing. Of course there's nothing. That's not creepy at all. So I hurriedly flick on the front porch lights as well as the back deck lights and head back upstairs. After another half hour or so of playing video games, I decided it was probably about time to finish the bowl I had started earlier in the evening and headed back downstairs to get a quick smoke session. The evening was pretty peaceful, all things considered. The air was finally cooling a little bit. Some clouds had rolled in and I could hear birds chirping all throughout the grove in front of me. As I smoked, I watched the lightning storm over the trees in the distance. One of the dogs had joined me on the deck and was chilling at my feet as I sucked down the last of the smoke in my bubbler. All in all, the evening had finally chilled out and I was feeling a little more at ease. It was until I thought I heard a faint whistle from the forest in front of us. The dog perked up again, and all of a sudden, my mood shifted. My hair began to raise, and I was covered in goosebumps. The temp had cooled off a little bit, but not enough to cause that kind of reaction. Again, we heard the whistle. The dog stood up and began to growl, staring off into the distance. I followed her gaze, and straining to see through the darkness, I carefully scanned the horizon, searching for the source of the sound. Suddenly, I caught the dark shape of a person standing at the edge of the woods, motionless. As I tried to gain a better look at the figure, it vanished. We're talking into thin air. One minute it was there, the next it wasn't. The sound was though. In fact, it had become far more persistent than before, and as the whistling continued, it began to sound more, I'm not sure what the right word is, frantic, but also twisted. Somehow, I could trace it as it moved. It sounded like it was shifting back and forth impossibly fast across the expanse of woods in front of us, echoing throughout the surrounding area. At this point, I had had enough. I quickly ushered the dog back into the house and locked the door and began making my rounds around the house, assuring every door and window in the place was secure. I've since locked myself and the dogs inside the bedroom, but I can still hear the whistling outside. It's gotten closer, a lot closer, and it sounds just as hysterical as before, but also more garbled. I'm not sure how to describe it exactly, but here's the problem I'm having. The house has no air conditioning, so closing and locking every door and window made it insufferably hot in here. My only source of cool air is this big-ass, loud-ass air conditioning unit that the owners bought for the room I'm staying in. It's one of those ones where you stick the hose in the window and it sucks the air in and blows cold air into the room. But I'm trying to keep as low of a profile as possible. All the lights in the house are off still, and I prefer it if it were whatever is currently outside didn't know my exact location inside the house. I've grabbed my gun and loaded the clip with the max amount of bullets, for safety, and I'm currently sweating my ass off inside this second-story bedroom with two hot, panting dogs. I have both windows open, so the slight breeze coming through helps a little, but I can still hear whatever it is outside, whistling away, and now it's walking around the perimeter of the house. I can hear its footsteps shuffling around below my bedroom window. The dogs seem rather concerned as well, but at least they're remaining pretty quiet overall. I'm not looking outside. I'm sort of afraid of what will happen if I do, so I guess I'll chill here, gun in hand, and if I survive the night, I'll post an update. Tell you what, though, ever since I read that story about the whistling man, it stuck with me. Something about it really got under my skin, and now, somehow, I'm living it. Maybe there's something to be said about that. Fate, or manifestation, or something. I don't know, but I can tell you from experience, if you ever hear someone whistling at you, take it seriously. Maybe it's nothing, but the world is a crazy place, and it's always best to be safe over sorry. Pray for me. Well, I survived the night, albeit sweaty as hell. The whistling lasted for a very long time last night. Like I said, I could hear whatever it was creeping around outside my bedroom window. As it walked, it would whistle the same two-note pattern over and over again in quick succession. I would hear it fade away as it rounded the house and get louder again as it would pass under my bedroom windows. I'm not sure how long this went on for, and I don't know how I managed it, but somehow I was able to fall asleep. And when I woke up this morning, the dogs were more than ready to get outside. After exiting the bedroom, I did one more pass around the house, just checking inside and out to make sure it was all clear before letting the dogs into the backyard again. Once I felt good about it, I slid the doggy door cover out, and the dogs happily sprinted outside. While they did their thing, I grabbed my monster and began my daily duties around the house, just watering the indoor plants and such. When I went to feed the dogs their breakfast, I found the container used to hold their food empty because I'm lazy, so I walked to the basement to refill it. I say basement, but it's not really that. It's more like halfway beneath ground level. Looking out the windows down there, the ground is about chest high. As I walked down to refill their food, I noticed something strange. What looked like an unnaturally large, dirty handprint on one of the basement windows. It looked as if someone with huge fingers knelt down and was looking through the window last night. Screw that, so I quickly grabbed the dog's food and walked back upstairs. At this point, I decide I should probably do a full check of the exterior of the house, and I need to check the mail anyway, so I grab my gun and take my first steps out the front door. And all seems normal, if not a little bit eerie. The morning is overcast and sprinkling with some distant thunder, which just makes the whole situation feel so much spookier. It's like I'm in a horror movie or something. So I begin making my around the house. Scanning the field out front, I see nothing. All seems ordinary. Rounding the corner to the right, I see the basement window with the handprint on it. Looking at it in the daylight, it looks a little more red in color than it did from inside. I'm not sure if that should concern me or not. I continue to the backyard, passing around the back deck. Nothing. I do a quick scan of the tree line where I saw the figure last night, but all seems normal. I round the next corner under my bedroom, and again, nothing. I'm not really sure what I expected. Finally, I round the house to the front again. The only thing off around here is that damn handprint, and that's pretty freaky, but nothing to lose my mind over, quite frankly. So, other than that handprint, feeling better about my situation, I finally made my way down the long driveway toward the mailbox. But as I moved closer, I noticed something else. There was a small, pitch-black mass at the end of the driveway. Getting closer, I could finally see what I was looking at. It's a dead crow. Its neck is twisted, broken. It's splayed out perfectly with its wings outstretched to either side, and it's missing both of its feet. I wouldn't normally be too concerned with this either, considering all the nature out here, but with the handprint on the window and last night's whole whistling fiasco, I'm more than a little freaked out. Someone or something clearly left this out here for me to find. I've called to let the owners know what's happening, but from the comfort of their cruise ship suite, they really didn't seem too worried about it all. I'm sort of debating calling the police at this point, but I'm not sure the situation is that serious yet. Also, the last thing I want to do is screw with the cops in any capacity, so, I think I'll wait it out another night and see what happens. I have the dogs ready to fight. I have my knife, and I have my Glock. I think I can handle one more night of whatever this BS is. And hey, if something more serious happens, I'll make an executive decision and get the 5-0 involved. But until then, I'm gonna wait it out and keep updating you all as things progress. Thanks for keeping up with me. It makes me feel better knowing you all are out there reading this. I was 15 the first time I tried to kill myself. It was your typical teenage angst story. I was bullied, made to feel like I didn't belong, and finally decided that I really did. I went home that night and hung myself using a belt and the stair banister. Luckily, I was a stupid kid and was pretty noisy about the whole affair. My father found me and cut the belt before I ran out of oxygen. The second time I tried, I was 22, in the middle of my junior year of college, and losing my stuff daily due to stress and anxiety. I finally cracked under the pressure, and this time decided I would try the pill route. I took about triple the normal dose of my anxiety medication and washed it down with a bit of whiskey. My roommate found me an hour later, unresponsive. He called EMS and started performing CPR right away, doing chest compressions in an attempt to get my heart beating again. He was about to give up when the ambulance arrived. A moment after he stopped compressions, my heart suddenly started beating again. This was followed by me bolting upright and vomiting in his lap. Not the best way to thank someone for saving your life. My third attempt fizzled out pretty quick. I decided that I wanted something quick, relatively painless, and something that I couldn't easily be brought back from this time. So, I grabbed the nice toaster my aunt had gotten me when I moved into my apartment and took a bath. I was 25 and still not smart enough to research things or plan accordingly. I dropped the toaster in a full bathtub and it immediately shorted the breaker, leaving me sitting in an almost overflowing bath with a ruined toaster and more feelings of failure. Ready for the irony, the first time I actually died wasn't by my hand. I was crossing the street downtown, trying to get back to my car after working a much longer shift than I should have, and got hit by a truck. This was 8 months ago, and I was legally dead for 4 minutes. Thing is, it felt like years. It wasn't how you hear it described in those inspirational stories, not any I had heard anyway. There was no tunnel, no light, no pearly gates. There was no indication of hell either, with fire and brimstone falling everywhere. No, the next thing I saw after getting hit by that truck was the crossroads I woke up at. It was a 4-way intersection in the middle of a dilapidated town. Stoplights were hanging from each side, blinking yellow, and a thick fog filled the entire area. I could only see maybe 100 feet in either direction. It took a few minutes to get my bearings and remember what happened. By the time I did, I could hear footsteps pounding my way, growing louder by the second. I turned to look up, just in time to have a man that looked a little younger than myself smack right into me, knocking us both off our feet and to the hard pavement below. "Damn, where did you come from?" He was shouting, panic rising in his voice. He scrambled back to his feet and started running again, going in the same direction. He stopped briefly and turned back, giving me a solemn look. "I would get going if I were you." "They're on their way." "Who?" I asked, still picking myself off the ground. He didn't stick around to answer and disappeared into the fog seconds later. I decided to just assume I was dreaming. There wasn't much to prove I wasn't, after all. I was hit by that truck, probably knocked out, and now I'm just stuck in this weird dream, maybe in a coma somewhere. Just have to wait around here until I wake up. The footsteps approached again, pounding against the pavement, in the same panicked rhythm as last time. They were running from something. He appeared from the fog yet again, coming to a complete stop right beside me this time, and letting out a tirade of curses. Wrong way. He was looking in every direction, trying to size up where to go next. Which direction did I run last time? That one. I pointed to my left, the yellow light illuminating my outstretched arm in the fog. I noticed I was wearing the same jeans and hoodie that I had changed into before leaving work, except now there were tears in the fabric and dark smudges all over. My skin underneath the tears was scraped and burned, as if I had been dragged across asphalt. The man tossed a rock over at the direction I pointed, landing it squarely in the center of the road. He turned back to me and shook his head. "I told you to run," he said again. "You don't want to get caught." He was cut off by something lifting him into the air. As I looked, I saw a tendril poking from the center of his chest, holding him above the ground. Damn, he coughed out blood. The tendril began to grow, enveloping him. As it did, "Run, you dumbass. Avoid anywhere you see one of those rocks." He was snatched backward into the fog, his scream the only thing left. I didn't ignore his warning this time. Even if this was a dream, I wasn't sticking around to see what that thing would do to me. I started running in the opposite direction he had come from, taking twists and turns every time a new intersection came up. I could feel something, multiple somethings, watching me from the rooftops and alleys of the buildings. There were things out there hunting. Maybe some were hiding. I ran for what seemed like an eternity, not stopping until I hit a 3-way street with a giant building along one side. Hazelton Elementary School, it read. I didn't care what it was. The door was open, and I could see a light inside. I ran in and slammed the door behind me. The hallway I entered into was dingy and dark, lights flickering like a cheap horror movie, posters of events and art done by students lined the walls. Public service announcements about washing hands, saying no to drugs, and other typical campaigns were everywhere. It looked like a typical elementary school. Something was off though, something I couldn't place for the life of me. I could hear children laughing down the hall. If there were kids here, there had to be teachers. Maybe a teacher could point me to somewhere safe. My footsteps echoed in the empty hallway, making a terrifying song. When mixed with the laughter, the door just ahead was open, with the voices pouring forth from it. I stepped into a classroom full of children, all suddenly silent at their desks, facing the other side of the room, where a blank chalkboard hung on the wall. Excuse me, I uttered. They all turned as one, looking directly at me. They had no eyes, just hollow pits, pure darkness. They began screaming as one, a high-pitched shriek that seemed to be layered in multiple octaves, many not humanly possible. I ran then, my screams mixed with theirs, as I went, fleeing through the hallways trying to find any way out I could. Finally, there came a broom closet on my left. I dove in, slamming the door behind me. I scrambled for a lock, and put anything heavy I could find in front of the door, then settled back into a corner, hugging my knees close to my chest and choking back tears. There was a clock up on the wall, but it was either broken or being affected by whatever this place was. All three hands were moving around the clock, varying speed as they went. I don't know how long I sat there, watching the hands spin and listening intently for whatever could be out there. I'm not sure when I fell asleep, but that's when I knew that what was happening wasn't just a dream. This was really happening. I fell into a dreamless sleep, sitting in the corner of a broom closet in some messed up afterlife, waiting to be devoured by monsters that lurked in the fog. I woke up in a daze, not knowing how long I had been asleep. I jumped to my feet in surprise, remembering the eyeless children and terrifying sounds from before, but hit my head on a shelf that I hadn't realized was above me. Damn, I shouted before I realized what I was doing. The door began to rattle immediately, something pounding against the other side. Whatever it was didn't sound friendly, as there was a high-pitched screeching coming from the hallway, just like the children had made. I brought my hand up to my mouth, trying to muffle my terror. The noises continued for a few minutes before stopping abruptly. I could hear footsteps moving away from the door, almost skipping, like a child. After a few minutes of silence, I decided to peek out. I knew I couldn't stay there forever and decided to take a quick look and make a break for the exit. As soon as possible, I turned the handle as slowly as possible, trying not to make any noise. The door made a high squeal as it opened. I looked out into the hall. Nothing to my left. To my right, the lights were flickering, and something ran by at the end, a shadow of something small. Screw it. I ran in the empty direction, as fast as I possibly could, sprinting at full speed, trying not to scream as I went. I could hear something behind me, but I was too afraid to look lest I see one of those eyeless children or something worse. Finally, there was a huge double door just ahead, with a push bar to open it. Not slowing down, I lowered my shoulder a bit and hit it head on, busting through and falling on my face to the concrete outside. Elbows were scraped, and I hit my nose, causing blood to pour forth. But I scrambled to my feet and kept going, turning down the nearest street toward another blinking stoplight. Screams followed me down the street, rising from nearby buildings and alleyways. They were signaling, telling whatever other monsters that were here that fresh meat was on the run. This was their dinner bell. That was the main course. A garage door rolled up a couple of feet on a building to my left. Slowing down slightly, I could see a face poking out from underneath, looking both ways down the street. They saw me and motioned me over quickly. Dead in here. Quick. I didn't need to be told twice. I dove in, rolling under the small space that was opened. The door fell shut behind, and I just laid there for a moment, trying to find my senses. The person that had opened it for me sat down by the opposite wall. She stared at me for a moment, sizing me up. "So, you must have just arrived," she said after a few minutes. "Guess you've seen some of the local residents." "Where the hell am I?" was the only question I could muster up. I was still near hyperventilating, trying to keep my wits about me. So much had happened in the past few hours that I didn't even know what to ask. "Can't help you there. Only thing I know is this place is constantly changing. The only thing consistent is the fog. Otherwise, I've seen this place as a town, a forest, even an industrial park. It's constantly shifting with no rhyme or reason as to when or what. She looked around again, a dim light bulb overhead casting shadows over her face. Her eyes looked even more sunken than they actually were. So what the hell are these things out there? I asked next. Not much help there either. Monsters is the best answer I have for that. Which ones have you run into? I went on to tell her about the man I ran into when I first got here, how he was taken by a tendril. She simply nodded. Then the story about the classroom full of eyeless children. She gave a shudder at that. Yeah, we don't go near the school if we can help it. Monsters are bad enough, but when they look like that, it's so much worse. Wait, I asked, surprised. How many of you are there? Who knows, now? She stared up at the light again, lost in thought. Sounds like we lost someone to that tendril. There's usually about 5 or so people here at any given time from what I've seen. You either get devoured or turned by the monsters, or you find the way out. So there's a way out. Where? You'd think I would be sitting here with you if I actually knew. She scoffed, giving me a condescending look. They say there's a way out somewhere around here. If you find it, you get to live again. If not, you stay here, either until these things take you or you hit your limit and become one yourself. She sighed and leaned her head back against the wall, looking defeated. I felt bad for her. She had obviously been here a long time, and God knows the things she had seen here. The poor woman looked exhausted, like she just wanted to lay down and die. I got to my feet and offered her a hand. So apparently we need to find the way out, I said, waiting for her to grab my hand. She was simply studying me, trying to figure out if she should trust me or not. Look, we don't have many better options, do we? She just sighed and grabbed my hand, rising to her feet and brushing dust from her clothes. Guess not, she said. Just be careful. If it comes down to it, I won't hesitate to leave your ass behind. You must have been really popular in the real world, huh? I gave her a grin. This was still a total mess, and God knows if we would make it out of this and back to life, but at least I wasn't alone anymore. It only took dying to get there. So, anything we can do about these things? You said we could become them if we're here for too long. Yeah, your last memory is dying, right? From what I've gathered, this is where we go. No heaven, no hell, just this, an endless game of death and being haunted. Hell, we don't even know if the gate is real or if it really sends you back to the living world. We just have to hope. Well, we're not going to find it waiting around here. Let's get moving. I started poking around the garage, trying to find anything that could be used as a weapon. I doubt I could do anything to the monsters out there, but I was at least going to try. I started to laugh when the realization hit me. What's so funny? She asked. I've spent half my life wishing I was dead, trying to achieve that goal. Now I'm fighting to be alive. Kind of funny if you think about it. We left the garage after an hour, taking the time to plan and prepare for whatever may be out there. Turns out her name was Chloe, and by her count she had been here for at least 3 weeks. She wouldn't say much about what she had seen or how she got here though, and it seemed to bring up painful memories. When I asked, Chloe rolled up the garage door and I slid under to check both sides of the street. Everything looked clear at the moment, so I motioned for her to follow. We crept out and started heading to the left, working in the same way I was before finding her. The fog hadn't lessened, and it seemed darker than it was before. So you said people can turn into these things? I whispered to her as we walked, keeping an eye on any side alleyways and the windows above. Haven't seen it myself, only heard secondhand from others. They said after so long in here people just begin to morph, grow other limbs, twist in ways no human should, lots of messed up stuff. We both shuddered thinking of it, how it could happen to us. We walked in silence for a while. After that, listening for any movement in the stillness of the fog. There was a scream some distance away, probably 2 blocks or so to our left. It was cut off quickly. You think? She started to ask. I just nodded in response. Someone just met their end. There was movement ahead, subtle, almost unnoticeable except for a small scraping sound it left behind it. There was something dragging itself across the pavement just a ways in front of us. Something big. The streetlights on either side began to flicker, causing my perception to falter. I couldn't tell if the shadow of whatever it was coming closer or moving away. The lights finally went out completely, leaving us in an ethereal darkness. Damn, I heard Chloe whisper. I looked over and could make out her silhouette, holding the crowbar she had found. prepared to strike if need be. They ready to run. I grunted acknowledgement. Whatever it was had stopped moving. The shadow was still ahead, almost like a statue now. Despite being able to make out Chloe's silhouette, this just looked like a large blob, an ink blot on the foggy background, towering at least 8 feet tall. Think we can sneak past? I posed the question. Probably not, she replied. Not that we have much choice. We moved to one side of the street, pressing ourselves against the brick wall of the storefront, trying to move as quickly and silently as possible. We shimmied along the edge, making our way past the blob while not taking an eye off of it. We had made it a couple of feet past when I tripped on a gutter coming off the building. Thunk! I hit the ground hard, landing on my knee. Pain shot up my leg. I bit my lip to try and stifle any noise. Before it could come out, blood began to bead around my teeth. Run, Chloe whispered. I looked back to see the blob unfurling through the gloom, appendages rising out of it on every possible side. An angle, all ending in hands with jagged, broken fingers. I still couldn't see the whole thing clearly, just the shadow. It let out a high-pitched screech, almost like a dog whistle, before thundering towards us. Adrenaline shot through my veins. I went from the kneeling position on my hurt knee to a full-on sprint, Chloe right beside me. Despite its size, the blob was right behind, keeping on as at an ever-closing distance. Next crossing, turn left, Chloe said, breathless. It shouldn't be able to take sharp turns. When we hit the next intersection, we both took the left around the corner, staying to the wall, as tight as we could. Chloe was right. It went cascading past, hitting a building on the opposite side of the street, and busting through its window with a loud crash. Damn, we were just trying to get some distance. But we raised the dinner bell instead, and now familiar screams of the damned rose all around us as they came charging from any hiding place possible. Oh god damn it, Chloe said. There was a group of creatures slithering toward us from an alleyway, snake-like bodies with human heads and faces. From ahead of us there was something lumbering in our direction, more than double my height, with arms and legs like small trees. This was bad. We were surrounded by ever more horrifying creatures. The fog was closing in along with these monsters. Chloe and I huddled together, backs to the wall, waiting for our inevitable death after death. One of the snake creatures spun forward. Chloe tried to swipe it away with her weapon, but didn't hit it in time. Her crowbar made a sickly crunch in the monster as it hit the side, but it had already sunk teeth into her leg. She cried out in pain as I reached down, attempting to pry it off. Damn, I wanted to get out of here, she said. Didn't want to give that bastard the satisfaction. Her voice trailed off again as she looked down at the monster. I finally managed to pry its jaws open and pull it off of her leg, holding it right behind the head so it couldn't bite me as well. As we were looking down at it, I suddenly felt lightheaded and got the feeling in my stomach like I was dropping through space. Chloe looked like she was having the same feeling, though that could have just been the pain from the bite. The feeling finally faded. I grabbed the snake monster by the head and twisted it as far as I could. It let out a snap and a small squeal, life fading from its eyes. I threw it away into the street. What the hell? I said, looking around me. The street and surrounding storefronts were gone. In their place were closely growing trees, almost cutting off the fog due to how thickly grouped they were. I've never had the change happen while I'm in the open, Chloe whispered through grit teeth. It's always while I'm holed up somewhere. So where do we go now? I asked. I had only experienced the town. This was even more out of my wheelhouse than that was, and I was lost as is. She simply looked around, then started limping towards the nearest thicket of trees. She stopped by one and looked up. The trees grew tall, fog obscuring everything past the first layer of branches that started about 20 feet up. She seemed to be sizing up the tree, inspecting it. Think you can climb? She asked. Why? Not like the fog is any less up there. We're still just as blind, I told her. She grimaced at that. It would be great to get a vantage point to see our surroundings, but I doubt we would actually be able to see any more than we can now. If anything, it would just risk more injury. We set off through the fog, knocking a mark into every other tree we passed with the crowbar so we could make sure we weren't walking in circles. Eventually, we came to a clearing with a small shack. The door closed and windows shuttered. We cautiously pushed the door open, checking inside. A knife flashed by my head, sticking halfway into the door behind me. I heard a voice from the corner. Get out. A low growl, vaguely male, The voice sounded muffled though. I squinted to see in the dim light. A man was standing in the corner, a hood drawn up over his head. He moved towards us, continuing to speak. Not supposed to be here. Made to leave. Need to get out. Damned things. Not gonna be like them. Not gonna be damned. As he stepped forward, I could see why he sounded this way. Chloe gasped behind me. His mouth was halfway sealed shut by his own flesh. His right arm seemed normal, but his left was grotesquely fused together, forming into a claw. He's turning. Chloe whispered. You mean it's not an instant thing? I asked incredulously. The hideous man in front of us should be dead. Well, more dead than he already was. His breathing was labored, no surprise due to the skin blocking off half his face. God knows what could be happening to his insides. With show he looked on the outside. He pointed at us with one of the claws. You made to leave. This is my shack. I'll die here. They won't take me. He was raving mad, words obscured. Not going to take old Mickey. No, they won't. We're not like them. Please, just talk to us, Chloe said, moving toward him with her hands up in front of her. Chloe, don't get too close, I shouted, trying to pull her away from the half-man, half-monster that she was moving toward. I didn't trust this guy, no matter if he was turned or not. He could attack any second. No, he could help us. I've never heard anything about someone turning and still keeping their sense of self. Maybe he knows something. Maybe he knows where the way out is. Her voice rose with excitement as she spoke, still edging towards him. Please, Mickey, right? I'm Chloe. We're not here to hurt you. Maybe we can help. How long have you been like this? He still had the claw raised toward her, but lowered it ever so slightly as she spoke. His eyes seemed to water a bit, giving away a vulnerability. You look like her, Ash. Where is she? He started looking around frantically, calling out for whoever Ash was. She was right there with me. Oh God, Ash, I hope you're okay. If I find that bastard. What happened to you, Mickey? Chloe asked, moving nearer as he lowered his arm. His tears were flowing freely now, running down the overgrown skin on his mouth. He let out a muffled sob. We were at a festival. I heard gunshots. I put her behind me, and next thing I know I'm here. He replied quietly. What festival? I asked him. My hometown. It was a local beer and burger festival we have every year, he said, looking shell-shocked. It suddenly hit me that I knew what he was talking about. Wait, Parsonville, I said. He nodded. No way. That was 6 months ago. Hell. So even if you find the exit, it wouldn't do any good, would it? He would still be dead. Stop it. Chloe hissed at me. I could see Mickey getting a glazed over look. My head was spinning. There was no way this could all really be happening. He's been surviving in here for 6 months, running from monsters, and God knows what else. If he got out, who's to say he wouldn't come back as one of them? I'm sorry, I said softly, looking at him. I needed to put on a face. I wanted so badly to be brave during all this. If Mickey could face this hell for 6 months, I could stay calm for 10 minutes to help him. Look, Mickey, maybe we can still all get out of here. Time probably doesn't work the same way. Have you heard anything about a way out? He studied me for a few moments, then scratched his head with the talon. A muffled sigh escaped him. I heard a little bit here and there. Something about a building that leads to nothing. Says it's deep in the middle of town though. Where are we at now? The forest. Chloe replied. It just changed a few hours ago. Factory should be next then. Be easier to find our way to the town from there, he said. Chloe gave him a look like she didn't know what he meant. He shrugged at her. This place don't work like normal. I've wandered into the town from the forest before. Made my way into the factory from the town. Seems like the land moves when it wants, but most everything stays in position relative to each other. Great, because stuff wasn't insane enough, I said. So what do we do then? Wait here until it changes again. We didn't get a chance to decide. Something had heard our exchange in the shack. There was a pounding on one of the walls as something screamed outside. The frame shook and threatened to fall in. Something was on the roof now. Time to leave, Chloe said, hefting her pipe and inching toward the door. The room continued to rattle as something stomped around above us, trying to find a weak spot in the boards. Chloe signaled to us both as we followed her. She gave a countdown, threw open the door, and ran full sprint. We both followed. We had only made it a few feet, not even into the tree line, when something grabbed her. It was large, at least 15 feet tall, sinew muscle ripples across the length of its body as leathery wings unfurled. It grabbed her with two powerful arms, then burst back into the air, leaving huge gashes in the earth. I hardly had a chance to shout before another just like it did the same to me. The last thing I felt before losing consciousness was the strong arms binding me to it and it looking at me with dark, black eyes. Before it had butted me, I woke up sprawled out on cold concrete. To my left I could see Chloe. To my right was an open street. Mickey was standing there, surrounded by a horde of other creatures that were already fully turned. He looked back at me, one eye completely black while the other was still an emerald green. He would have looked slack-jawed if not for the skin growing over his mouth. He looked back to the monsters waiting and let out a screech. "Mickey, you're still human. Come on," I said. I moved back toward Chloe and tried shaking her awake. She stirred slightly as Mickey screeched again. He began to move towards us and finally grabbed Chloe, slicing her shoulder open as he did so. He dragged her back to the monsters. "Chloe, no." I started to get up and stumble towards them, but tripped and fell. A creature on all fours leapt towards me, landing on my back and digging claws in. I screamed in pain. Chloe finally woke up, looking around her and beginning to scream in terror. Mickey threw her forward into the crowd of monsters. They continued to watch as she scrambled up, blood flowing from her shoulder and staining the pavement. "Mickey, no. You've lasted so long. Please don't do this," Chloe begged him. He looked towards the other creatures, lifting his talon toward Chloe. This was it. This must be the final measure. The transformation would be complete once he killed. The monster would take over. "Mickey, think about Ash. She needs you," Chloe said to him. He sliced the claw forward, his inhuman screech turning to a scream as his own chest was ripped open. The monsters gathered around began to screech and writhe, becoming a wrathful mess. Mickey screamed and dug the claw in further. As he did, I noticed the area he was standing in grow dark. The air seemed to ripple and break, becoming a static mass. Chloe caught my eye and nodded to me. I flipped over quickly while the creature on my back was distracted. It fell to the ground with a thump and looked dazed. Chloe and I both ran toward the break in space. Chloe tried to grab Mickey on the way, but he pushed her off of him, making her fall back into the void. She disappeared into thin air. "I can't go," he grunted through the pain. His blood was pouring to the pavement, a deep back instead of the normal scarlet. He dug in deeper. "Ashley Foreman, please, make sure she made it." I nodded. A monster that had been on my back was leaping towards us. Mickey pushed me out of the way at the last second, taking the full force of the hit. I saw the light fade from his remaining human eye as he hit the ground. The rest of the group fell forward onto him, ripping and tearing. Then everything went dark. Chloe was in front of me, staring at a distant point of light in the darkness. She turned to look at me as I stood. "Guess this is it," she sighed. "Thank you. I don't think I could have made it without your help." "You kidding me?" I replied. "I would have been eaten way back there without you. I owe you more than my life. If you're ever in France, give me a shout." Chloe Goddard. "It'll be nice to get to know you out of here." "Deal," I said. She held her hand out. I took it and we walked forward, stepping into the distant light. "We have a pulse," was the first thing I heard after stepping through. I opened my eyes to see a paramedic standing over me. The next few days were a blur. From what I was told by the doctors, I was dead for 4 minutes. It felt like days to me. I ended up staying in the hospital for a few weeks while I recovered, but made it out with a broken leg, lacerated liver, and some cracked ribs. I looked up Ash when I got out. She was at the festival in Carsonville when a shooter started firing into the crowd. Her father, Mickey, jumped in front of her and took the bullet, saving her life. I sent her a letter a couple of weeks ago telling her how I had died and met her dad, letting her know that he loved her and wants the best for her. I left out the horrifying details for her sake, but let her know how good of a man he was. I looked up Chloe online. Turns out she had been in a coma for the past 2 weeks after suffering multiple injuries from an abusive ex-boyfriend. She had a brief flatline a couple of days, but came back from it. I was there visiting when she woke up. She gave me a smile, and we just sat there together for a while, feeling a nice calm after our shared ordeal. Communicating wasn't so easy. Turns out the whole time there she had been speaking French while I was speaking English. Just another weird bit to chalk up to the afterlife, I suppose. We started to converse slowly, teaching each other our respective languages. We get along even better here than we did there. I don't know what caused that door to open, whether it was Mickey's sacrifice or just right place, right time. Either way, I hope I'm wrong about that being the only afterlife. Hopefully that's just the place you go before it's truly your time, when your fate is still undecided. Hopefully when you reach your natural end, you gain the paradise everyone speaks of. Let me start this off by saying no, this is not some PTSD-induced incident. No, it's not the stress. No, I'm not crazy. And you need to listen to me before this happens to someone else. It all started several weeks ago during the best day of my life, the day I found out that I was pregnant with my first child. Everything was amazing. We called both of our parents. We threw a party, we celebrated, and we were filled with joy and amazement. Then we went to the doctor. Everything was fine with the child, but there was a problem. You see, when I was 8, I was diagnosed with a generalized anxiety disorder and prescribed alprazolam. This could cause complications with the pregnancy, and I could no longer take the drug. Instead, I would swap over to a selective serotonin reuptake inhibitor that would still work without affecting my baby. So I swapped over to the new medication and went on with my life. Now it didn't work as well as the previous ones, and I would still find myself being overwhelmed, but I could cope with it. During all this, Greg, my husband, was amazing. He did everything to help make my life easier, from the big things like taking over most chores around the house to small things like rubbing my feet after a long day at work. Just staring into the deep wells of his bright sky blue eyes would make my worries disappear. He was my rock. Then we got an unexpected phone call. Greg's father, Travis, had a nasty fall in his garage, damaging his spinal cord. He needed emergency surgery, and even in the best case, he would stay wheelchair-bound for several months. Travis lives alone down in Florida, and he had no one to take care of him, so we did the only thing we could. Greg took a leave from work and flew down to Florida to take care of him while he recovered from his surgery. And while this might sound selfish, I was really worried about what I would do without him. And soon, that tiny house we lived in began to feel like a giant, empty mansion, and I never felt as alone as I did in those weeks. I would come home every day after work from some microwave food or order out from some delivery service, and then I would sit alone on the couch and watch TV until I fell asleep, wake up and do it all again. Not the healthiest thing for an expecting mother, I suppose. And then one particularly stormy night, as I was coming home from work, the rain was cascading down. It seemed like it was some sort of torrential rainfall or some terrifying storm that was blowing in. The wind was howling, thunder cracked in the distance, a freezing gust breeze blew through the neighborhood. The trees swayed, bent, and cracked under the weight of that wind. It seemed like it would be one hell of a storm. And then I saw it, sitting in the corner of the driveway, this little cat. It was a tiny black cat, and he looked so small and drenched by this torrential downpour, and I felt so bad for the little guy. He must be so cold. So I got out of the car, quickly ran over to him, and surprisingly, he didn't flinch or run away. He just sat there staring at me with those large amber eyes. I quickly scooped him up into my arms and carried him inside. He looked a bit malnourished. He was thin and scrawny, with his fur matted against his body, completely soaked. So I got out my hair dryer and a towel. I set it to a low heat and dried the cat. I then got him some food, an old can of tuna we had in the cupboard. Now at first, the cat was somewhat catatonic. It seemed that the severe cold and malnourishment left him in a bit of a state, but I tried to be very gentle, gave him some food, and I put him in an old cardboard box with a blanket inside and left him alone so he could rest. After my escapades with this animal, I made myself a quick microwave dinner, turned on the TV, sat down, and flipped to one of my shows. Eventually, the pictures on the screen began to blur as my eyes began to droop down with the relaxing pitter-patter of the rainfall and howling winds outside. As my eyelids drooped lower and lower down, I drifted off into dreams. But this dream was different. It was a strange dream, something I'd never felt before, and I awoke with a start, terrified. My heart was beating out of my chest, and my breath was coming hard and fast. It was a nightmare like I've never felt before. Now, I don't remember any monsters or people hunting me or anything like that, not even any visual from the dream. The only thing that I could recall was a feeling of something watching me, something very, very hungry watching, and I jerked open my eyes looking around in a panic, and froze as my blood ran cold. Sitting next to me on the couch was that cat, staring up at me with those large amber eyes, but these eyes weren't normal. There was something wrong with them, something all too human in them. I freaked out, jumped up, and backed away from it. Now don't judge me too hard for this, but I ran out of the room, opened the front door, grabbed a broom from the cupboard, and chased the cat out of my house into the dark cold rainstorm. Then I slammed the door behind me, locking it tight. Only when that strange animal was outside could I relax again. Eventually, when I sat back on the couch and started thinking it all through, I felt so stupid. It was just a cat, that weird human-like intelligence behind its eyes, that was just my imagination, just something left over from that nightmare. And I honestly reacted badly, and I shouldn't have chased him out. Well, it's too late now, and after about an hour of sitting on the couch again and watching some more shows, I eventually fell asleep again. Now, when I woke up in the morning, I had all but forgotten about the cat. So I woke up, got off the couch, and did my normal morning routine. I had a shower, got dressed, made myself some breakfast, and then got ready to leave. When I reached for the handle to open the front door, something was wrong. I heard something moving outside the door. It wasn't big, it wasn't a loud sound. It was as if some small animal had started running away from my front door, and I remembered the cat and felt really bad. The poor animal must have been out there all night trying to avoid the rainstorm. I could hear him running away, and I couldn't do much at this point. So I opened the door, took my keys, and went to work. From then on, though, it kept happening. Every time I got home from work, I would hear the cat around, always outside of my eyesight, but I could always hear him there in the background. When I would leave for work, he would run away from the front door. When I got back, he would run away into the bushes in the corner of the driveway. I didn't really see the cat again, not for at least 2 weeks, but I could always hear him, and it bothered the hell out of me. I did try to befriend him again, getting some catnip from a local pet store and some cat food which I left outside. I hoped maybe I could repair the damage I did to my relationship with this cat, but things didn't get better. In fact, they got a lot worse, but eventually I did see the cat again. I was making dinner for myself, and outside the window of the kitchen, I saw it sitting there in the corner in the shadows. Those large amber eyes stared up at me from the bushes, and it filled me with some strange dread. Those eyes looked wrong. The moment our eyes met, he bolted back into the shadows, disappearing from my view, and this pattern continued. At times when I would think I was alone, I would get this strange feeling of being watched. I would take the initiative and start searching. I would always, invariably find those large amber eyes staring at me through a window or a crack in the door. The only place I felt safe was in my bedroom, so I stopped watching TV at night, and then even that changed. You see, after a particularly bad day at work when I was feeling so overwhelmed, I got home, I got in bed, and I just wanted to fall asleep and forget the world. Then I heard some scratching. That wasn't possible. I was on the second floor of the house. There was a window, but there were no trees outside of it. There was no easy access to it. It isn't something you could easily climb or access. Yet I heard something at that window, and when I looked over, I saw a pair of large amber eyes staring at me, which then bolted, dropping 2 stories to the ground miraculously, and then running off into the shadows again. This was not possible. However, how the hell did it get to my window? At that point, I had had enough. I called the pest control specialist and told them there was a stray cat in my yard, and I wanted it gone. This large, burly man came one day in a beat-up truck, screeched down the driveway, pulling in and stopping for Huff. The man peeled himself out of the car, a large, an overweight man that seemed covered in scratches and scars from who knows what. He seemed perfect for what I needed. I told him there was this cat, and I needed it to go anyway, doesn't matter how. He looked at me and I could tell he was thinking I was a hysteric Karen, but I didn't care. He said with a grunt, "Sure, I'll handle it. I'll put up some traps outside. It'll be gone in the morning." But the strange thing was I never did see that man again. He did place some traps around my yard, but he never did collect them. I called his company's number, but nobody ever answered, and I had to assume he probably fled town for some or another reason and forgotten all about my job. But to his credit, the cat didn't show up again, at least not for the next week. But when he did return, it was so much worse. You see, he stopped hiding as much from me. I would catch him watching me more often, and when our eyes met, he would wait for a bit, watch, and turn around, and walk away. The more he watched me, the more I watched him back, and the more I noticed strange things about it. Yes, it had those strange human-like eyes, but there was more to it. Now that I started paying attention, I noticed that its front paws were longer than they should be. They honestly look a lot like the length of human arms would be. It just tucked them into his fur so you don't notice normally. Then there were its paws. I could swear it looked like there were almost thumb-like growths on the side of them. Honestly, at that point I was pretty scared, so I called another pest control specialist, which sent out another person. After a few days, they told me there were no cats around, they couldn't find anything, and there was nothing to remove. Bloody idiots. So I tried another company, and then another. At that point, I had tried at least 7 different pest control agents, and none of them could find this bizarre cat. But strangely, at this point I was starting to get less scared of the creature. It did deeply disturb me, but at the same time, it was always at a distance. It never approached me. Sure, it did watch me, and that scared me, but it never did anything. So even though I saw it, I stopped feeling threatened by it. I just felt that it was wrong. So I decided that I would put it out of my head that this was a source of stress I didn't need, and I would just ignore the animal and forget about it. It largely helped. Even though I kept seeing the creature, I stopped getting scared, and I stopped really doing anything about it. I just figured that it's a weird cat, and I'll leave it alone. But that was a mistake. I should have gotten the hell out of there. I should have gotten a gun and shot the bloody thing. I don't know what I should have done, but I shouldn't have done what I did, because the cat started getting more comfortable. It stopped running. When it caught my gaze, it stopped fleeing every time I was around it. I would find it watching me for longer, but I just kept ignoring it. And then one night, I awoke in the early morning, but something was very, very wrong. I opened my eyes and looked around the room. It was dark, but I could still see a faint light coming in from the curtains. But I couldn't move. My arms wouldn't respond. My legs didn't move. I couldn't roll over or move my head. I could just lie there and blink. Now at first, I panicked, and I was freaking out. I tried desperately to figure out what was happening, but after a few minutes, I realized this had happened before. When I was a child, there were a few nights when I was affected by sleep paralysis, where I would wake up and for a few minutes I wouldn't be able to move, until eventually, I would regain control of my body, and I'd be fine. So, I just have to wait it out and not stress. So, I lay there for a few seconds, until a sound broke the dead silence of the night. The sharp sound of breaking glass, but no footsteps, no sounds of people, nothing like that. It was just breaking glass, and then the door handle moved. But there were no sounds of footsteps, just the rattle of the handle. The door slowly pushed open with a loud creak as a small black form slithered into the room. A pair of glowing amber eyes caught my gaze, and I could swear you could see a small furry grin appear on its cat-like muzzle. At that moment, I could see it in his eyes. Not just a human-like intelligence, but a hunger. Next, the creature did something so bizarre. It stood up on its hind legs, and slowly, with the grace of an old-timey gentleman, sauntered over to the bed, disappearing from my view. Then something slithered up onto the bed underneath the covers. I could see it. I couldn't move or even scream, but I could hear the crinkle of the bed sheets as it pushed its way toward me. Then an excruciating pain filled my stomach. The pain was unbearable and never ending. It felt like something was tunneling through my flesh, until eventually I blacked out. I awoke in a blood-soaked bed. With a shaky hand, I grabbed my cell phone and dialed an ambulance. After hours of tests, the doctors told me I had a sleep paralysis incident, leading to a panic attack which caused a miscarriage. I was in a horrible state, full of fear and a deep hatred of that monster. I wanted nothing more than revenge. So I left the hospital and went to a gun store. Apparently, I couldn't get a gun that day, but I could get a crossbow. So I bought what I could get, a hunting crossbow with some bolts, and headed home. But that thing didn't show up. I waited for hours, so I sat down at my computer and started writing this, crossbow at my side, and waiting for the familiar feeling of being watched. After hours, I finally did feel it again, and looked up out my window to see not one, but 2 pairs of eyes. one glowing amber pair, and one sky blue pair, the exact same shade of sky blue I've seen 1,000 times before. I froze staring at the uncanny human intelligence of the sky blue eyes and felt a strange familiarity to it. After a few seconds, the pair fled back into the shadows, leaving me sitting here in tears. What should I do? My job, well, is that I keep people in cages. Yes, I know it's inhumane. No, I don't care for your opinion on it. There's a reason I do what I do. The people all are of ordinary appearance. Some are fat, some skinny, some have blonde hair, others are brunettes. If it were up to me, I'd let the people go, but I can't. They all did something, and now they're in the cages. The cages aren't cramped or anything. They're each about 5 by 5 by 5. There are 7 cages total. Each one holds a different person from a different background. Every 3 days, one gets taken away, and another is wheeled in. Never a member of the opposite sex either. If a man was in the cage, he'll be replaced by a man. Same for women. I don't know their names, but it's not my job to. I'm paid to feed them and watch them. I have given the cage names, which is then passed on their occupants. Cage number 1 is Fred. Usually, Fred's occupants are between 5'7" and 5'10". They always have brown hair, but styles and length vary, as does their weight. They are to be given 14 ounces of blood once every 7 hours. No mirrors within 30 feet of their cage. Cage number 2 is Cassie. All of the Cassies have been 5'4" or 5'6", never 5'5". They're always blonde, smaller women, petite one might say. They're to be given exactly 40 fluid ounces of water and a pound of raw meat daily. Cassie's cage is electrified unless she's being fed. Cage number 3 is Earl. Earl always is a scruffy looking dude with a handlebar mustache. Hair doesn't matter, nor does color. His rules are simple. 1 jar of mustache wax and a copy of the Times. However, the copy must always be not from within the previous year. He's also not to be given hair tonic for any reason. Cage number 4 is Mary. Mary is always a religious type, which religion varies. So far as I can tell, we've had 3 Muslims, 5 Christians, 5 pagans, and 2 Hindu Marys. They're almost always 5'3" and have varied in weight. No set rules, so I just give them whatever I have available as food. Well, except one, they're not allowed any access to holy or religious imagery, no matter what. Cage number 5 is Chad. Chad is always a blonde guy, usually clean cut with clothes that indicate high social status, designer clothes, and the like. Don't much care for Chad. He's to be given a cup of some green liquid. The liquid never kills them, doesn't even make them sick. Chads don't talk much, mainly because when he does, a black ooze comes out of every hole on his face. Freaky at first, but you get used to it. Cage number 6 is Bob. Bob is interesting, mainly because I can't tell what each person has in common. So far we've had all males, but they've consisted of 7 African Americans, 14 Caucasians, 8 Asians, and 13 mixed race. They've been everything from plumbers to bankers, and even homeless. Oh well, the mystery goes on. No set rules in place. They do require cleanup though. On day 2, their eyes are always missing, replaced with, oddly enough, 2 coins. They never seem to be in pain, however, even making idle chat with me. And finally, cage number 7 has only ever had 1 occupant. She's never been taken away. She's a 6-year-old girl named Lisa. She has a blue dress, blonde hair and pigtails, and an ever-present smile. The weird part, she's been here for at least a decade. Hasn't aged a day. All she ever does is sit in her cage. She's given coloring books and 30 minutes of TV time daily. Again, I don't make the rules. All I know, these people all did something the higher-ups won't tell me. So now we have the cages, the very unique and specifically made cages. I found this job through, of all things, Craigslist. The previous guard, whose name was not disclosed, left instructions for the feeding, maintenance, of the people. He listed their many quirks and how to handle each situation as it may arise. I was weirded out, but you get used to it, you know. That was 2010, and here we are now, 2020, and I'm still watching people in cages. Previous guy told me that they used to be simple beds, with each of the various characters strapped to them. All of them, except Lisa. Lisa was always given a small feather bed, and while she was strapped in, was always tucked into a blanket like one would do a child. My boss, or at least the guy who tells me my job, is an older guy. His left hand is kinda messed up. He said it was a cooking accident. Hot grease as it were. He could pass for an aging movie star in all honesty. Salt and pepper hair, with a voice like a knife through butter. Something is a little off about him though. I swear, I never remember his face correctly. It always looks different than I remember. Anyway, my boss, who goes by TD, told me the previous guy held this post for 30 years. The pay's good, don't get me wrong, but 30 years, a bit long. My first day on the job, I was shown the cages and explained what would be happening with the people. All I'm allowed to know is they did something really bad, so now they're locked away for 3 days. The beds were revoked for a reason no one has ever made clear. Something about teeth and a missing ear. Anyway, for 10 years, it's remained this way. Every 3 days, someone leaves and someone enters, all except for Lisa. Every new person gets the same treatment as the one they replace. What worries me is what happened yesterday. They added an 8th cage. Hey everyone, so a lot of you guys had some interesting theories as to why the people are locked away, and while they pique my interest, I won't investigate the matter any further. Not my job to ask questions. The installation of the 8th cage wrapped up yesterday, and today they brought in the first occupant. They brought in an old man. He wasn't even able to stand. They had to wheel him in as he was wheelchair bound. I couldn't imagine why they'd feel the need to lock him away. He wore an old respirator over his face, connected to an oxygen tank on his back. He looked about 90 and fit comfortably into his cage. I heard his ribs rattle with every breath as the door was locked shut. Instructions for care, as directed by TD, were 1 live rodent up to 5 pounds in weight. This was to be fed to him once per day. I think I'll call this one Bill for now. Seems fitting somehow. Today, they took another of the Freds away. 2 hours later, he was replaced by a different man, but ticking the usual boxes. 5'8", brown hair, the usual. This Fred was morbidly obese, at least 400 or so pounds. Mary was saying her usual prayers, and Lisa was coloring. A quiet day on the job, as they usually were. That was until feeding time. No surprises until I got to Bill. The old man didn't even seem aware of his surroundings, if I'm being honest. He looked to be on death's door. Truthfully, I wondered what anyone in his state could have done. I tossed in a large rat, still squirming. He caught it quickly. He lifted off his oxygen mask, just enough to expose his mouth, and unhinged his jaw. Like a snake, he ate it whole, bones and all. I jumped back a bit, startled by the sudden motion from the seemingly weak old man. I moved on to Bob. Bob's eyes were replaced today. By the way, feel I should mention, the coins aren't the same kind of coins every time. They've been everything from American coins to Greek drachmas. Anyway, the cleanup comes in with cleaning up the blood from the replacement. Yeah, it's not as clean as I may have implied. They aren't just in his sockets. They're stitched there. There's usually quite a bit of blood. This particular Bob is an investment banker, so he claims, from Manhattan. He's a middle-aged guy, about 35 if I had to guess. This time, his eyes were a pair of 50-cent pieces, the JFK ones if I had to guess. Grabbing a mop, a bucket of water, and a stun gun, I got to work. The cleanup process usually takes 20 to 30 minutes. Next was bringing Lisa her television for her allotted 30 minutes. She always preferred to watch movies like Cannibal Holocaust or The Human Centipede. Her favorite movie is a Serbian film, The Tuvi. Well, it was one of those ones you'd see at school, like on a wheeled table, strapped down. You know what I mean. She had a doll that I hadn't seen her with before. She had a teddy bear, as was part of her instructions for care. But this doll was new. The doll had 2 hollow sockets for eyes, and chunks of black hair stapled to the head. It wore a blue dress, similar to Lisa's. In place of hands, it had what appeared to be the paws of cats. It stood about 2 feet tall. Its face had a perpetual grin. Again, not unlike the young girl to whom it was in the possession of. I made a note to inform the higher-ups and moved on to the next cage. Then it was grabbing an archived newspaper and a jar of mustache wax for Earl. He grumbled out a thank you and retreated to a corner of his cell. Fred had made a mess with his meal of human blood. Sighing, I grabbed the mop again. My job, as you can likely tell, is not very exciting. The worst part is the waiting. Every once in a while, one of my guests tries to escape. Thus, I have a loaded assault rifle with anti-personnel rounds next to my small desk I monitor them from. Oh, my workstation. I don't know why I haven't told you all about it. I have a desk with 14 monitors. The monitors on the bottom show the occupants in their cages. The ones on top have vital readings. If they ever get too low or too high, I'm to press a button to call in special staff to take care of it. Again, I'm not told why they can't, but I assume it's to do with their health. But feeding them raw meat and human blood likely isn't helping matters, so I'm not entirely sure on that if I'm being perfectly honest with you. The most common breakout is the Marys. To date, 15 Marys have escaped, resulting in 42 casualties. Freds have escaped 6 times, with 20 casualties. One Fred I saw drank a guy's blood like a juice box. His vein was the straw. The rest have tried as well, but not with the success of Mary and Fred. Except for Lisa, who has never tried, at least not while I've been here. My rifle is a last resort if the security fails, but thankfully I haven't needed to use it yet, so while my job's dull, I'm always on edge, especially as I don't know much about number 8 yet. The weirdest part is the constant weeping I hear from number 8's cage. I'm curious about the next occupant of cage number 8, if I'm being honest. If there ever is one, guess we'll find out in 3 days, or whenever they move him out. Oh, I feel I should clarify. They aren't taken out in a certain order. There's always a chance the next one taken will be Fred. Or hell, it might be Lisa. Point is there's no set rotation. They're just taken randomly. Anyway, my next shift is about to start, so I'll have to check in with all of you later. Till next time. Okay, well I know what I said, but this is some major stuff. Lisa is gone. Not broken out. Just gone. I was watching the monitors, and 1 second she's there, the next, poof, gone. I've put the place in lockdown. Sounded the alarm. The whole 9 yards. I'll keep you guys updated as best I can. Well, there are a lot of dead bodies. Good news is I'm still kicking. Bad news, Lisa is still missing in action. But the doll, well, that's in cage number 8 now. TD got here an hour ago, and I gave him a rundown. He seemed extra freaked that Lisa vanished, especially on the same day as number 8's arrival. It's not my job to ask questions, but I'm starting to. I'll keep you guys informed. So Lisa is still missing. The place is still in lockdown, and I haven't been allowed to leave. They're afraid of her getting out, I guess. Besides the whole not aging thing, and her taste in movies, Lisa always struck me as the least harmful of the bunch. So I'm pretty worried considering how much they're freaking out about her possible breach. Even Fred's didn't evoke so much panic out of the higher-ups. Good news is I have some free time to write all of this out. Besides Lisa being missing, I've still been going about the normal routine. Feeding, removing bones from Bill's cage, cleaning up after Fred's feedings. Speaking of which, the new Fred is a particularly messy eater. Or would it be drinker, considering I'm giving it blood? Cassie seems particularly aggressive since Lisa's disappearance. She's tried more than once to bite me. The one that's been worrying me has been Bill. I was feeding him yesterday and saw something moving around inside of his chest as he downed his daily rat. Tomorrow is another move, or should be, at least. I'm not sure what with this security lockdown. So, since I haven't much to write about in events, I'll take a suggestion to tide you guys over. Some of you were curious about the personality of the people in the cages. Well, because I am a person of the people, I'll tell you about them. Fred is usually very quiet. However, if he misses a scheduled feeding, he gets exceptionally aggressive and talkative, making a lot of threats. My personal favorite had to be the time he told me if I was late feeding him again, he'd make a smoothie from my tendons. Overall, however, Freds, when I have interacted with them outside of a hostile state, they're very polite and well-spoken. Castles are less people, more animals. They don't speak much outside of grunts and growls. Personality-wise, they're as deep as a dog bowl. That said, they're also the least hostile of the bunch outside of feeding time. Probably has something to do with the electrified cage. I even hand-fed one while wearing thick leather gloves, but still, gave her some of my burgers, so while they look like normal if small women, they don't act like it. Marys are religious nuts. They're constantly praying or trying to turn someone to their religion. The current Mary is a pagan. She worships some ancient deity named Haster, always asking something about a sign. I dunno, they're interesting, but not much in the way of conversation. I tune him out most of the time. Bobs are mixed, as is to be expected. Most are very prone to conversation. Typically it's water cooler talk. You know, what happened at the game, or what happened on Game of Thrones. I actually chat with them during my coffee breaks. They're pretty nice guys. You know, ignoring the eye thing. But don't let that fool you. They've tried strangling me a few times. That's why I have the stun gun. Earl is Earl. Not much to say. He always has his nose buried in a newspaper, so he doesn't talk much. Chads can't speak due to the whole black substance from every orifice when they speak issue. Before she went missing, Lisa was your typical 6-year-old as far as personality is concerned. She even had an imaginary friend. She called him Mr. Abba. Her bear she called Bezel. Interesting names. But hey, she's a weird kid. Or at least, she's a strange whatever she is. I have no opinion on Bill, as he's still rather new. Oh damn, TD is getting all of us together for some kind of meeting. I'll update later. Update, okay, so TD gave us the rundown. When and if we find Lisa, she's to be given restrictions for the time being. Furthermore, we are to never reference her imaginary friend or her teddy bear directly from here on out. As for the doll, it's still in the cage with Bill last I saw, but no one else noticed or cared about it besides me and the caged. Mary in particular holds the doll in reverence, it seems. More weirdness from this place, I suppose. The security are still doing a full sweep to find Lisa, but so far no luck. I haven't mentioned the thing inside Bill to TD yet. Seems he has a lot on his plate right now. Never come to your boss with a problem, only solutions. Heard that in a movie. TD also gave all of the people with clearance the files on each captive. I haven't gone over them yet, but I'm certainly intrigued to find out why they've locked all of these people away. Update 2. In the middle of that last update, shots were fired. We found Lisa. She was eating a member of security. It was a mess, as limbs were arranged in a heart shape, and she had ripped off his scalp. When they found her, she was dipping his kidneys in ketchup like chicken nuggets. They naturally opened fire. She didn't so much as flinch. The man's intestines were draped around her neck like a scarf, and his scalp was on her head. I nearly vomited when I saw it. I'm a bit fuzzy on the details, but somehow we managed to secure her and placed her back into her cell. So that's what she eats, as it turns out. The doll was in her cage when she was put back. I didn't mention it to anyone, but the doll, which as I told you had cat paws in place of hands, well, one hand was now a human one, with a tattoo distinctly similar to the poor bastard Lisa was just eating. I'm going to read those files. I'm done not knowing what I'm dealing with. Update 3, well, I don't know much more than I did previously. I don't know what they did, or why they all fit into certain categories. Most of the file is redacted. This feels like a waste of time in all honesty, but it's a start. The only one that wasn't completely redacted was Cassie, and she's human in appearance only. She's some kind of succubus, or siren, or something. I'm not sure, but she's quite literally a man-eater. The pound of meat isn't any kind of meat. It's human meat. I still don't know where they go every 3 days, and why the care instructions are so specific. I'll keep you guys updated. Tomorrow's transfer day, so I came into work today, and TD was in a panic. Why? Number 8's skin was found in his cage. Not his body, just his skin. As for the doll, it's still with Lisa in her cage. I wanted to tell him about it, but one thing at a time, you know. Today's transfer day, and in a few hours one of the caged will be leaving. Though, I have no idea. Some of you suggested I attempt to talk to the current Mary about her religion. Maybe she knows something we don't. So that's what I'm gonna do. I sat in front of the cage, in an old wooden chair. Mary, as usual, was deep in prayer. She spoke some language I didn't understand. I cleared my throat, and she looked up. Have you seen the yellow sign? She asked, smiling ear to ear. She was a native woman, with an accent that seemed a mix of Australian and American. Aboriginal maybe. I shook my head. Why don't you tell me about it? Only pausing for breaths, Mary went into great detail about her patron entity, otherwise known as the King in Yellow, and in some places, simply the Yellow. Haster was a patron of shepherds, to some, to other an unfathomable darkness. I nodded, as if understanding, but truthfully I was more confused than I was previously. Finally, I asked, why are you here? Why are you? And I pointed to the cage there. I don't know, she said, her voice faltering for the first time. This Mary was a regular chatterbox, and this was the first time she had fell silent. What about that doll? The one the little girl has. She eyed the doll warily. Lisa was nose deep in a coloring book, but the doll looked right at her. I do not know. I thought at first it to be a vessel of haster, but she trailed off. What that crazy girl is saying is that doll is something else. Earl spoke up, for the first time in what seemed like ages. Why are you here then? I asked, turning my attention to the mustachioed man. He shrugged. Jaywalking, he replied, going back to his newspaper. Mary spoke again. The doll, it has a darkness, similar to the king, but not quite, she said. It was as she said this, the doors opened. They wheeled in the new captive, and as they approached Mary's cage, her eyes widened in fear. They shoved me aside roughly and unlocked her cage. They dragged Mary out, as she drug her nails into the ground with such force that it left a mark in the floor beneath her. They strapped her in, and as she cursed in that unknown language, they wheeled her away. Her replace, a nun, came soon after. Well, so much for that lead. Security had been on extra high alert since the old man, or guessing anyway, shed his skin. I was reprimanded by TD for talking to the pagan Mary about her religion. He didn't punish me or anything, but let me dot off with a warning. She said that doll had a darkness, and I believed her. I also talked to Lisa a bit today, asked about Mr. Abba. She said his full name is Donald Abba III. Never heard of an imaginary friend having a first and last name. I don't know. I have to focus on the job, so I'll update you guys later. Update. So I told TD about Lisa's doll. What he said worries me a lot. He said he didn't see any doll. That's unnerving. So not only is there a possibly sentient doll, but now I'm the only one who can see it besides the caged. I've conducted interviews with the rest of the cage since Mary's transfer, besides Cassie and Chad, because while they can't really speak, Fred was up first. He said he was there for simply being him. This particular Fred was so overweight, he was tired from standing for too long. So as he sat on the floor of his cage, I finally asked, "What do you know about that doll?" Gesturing to Lisa's cage. "About as much as you do, I suppose. Showed up in her cage one day." Showed up. How did I miss that on the monitors? Yes, sir. The woman, the one that was moved today, well, she wouldn't shut up about it. For a few hours at least. Then she avoided it like it pissed on her shoe or something. He snorted. "Where did you come from?" "Thurmond, West Virginia originally," he stated matter-of-factly. Moving on. Earl didn't provide much more info than Fred, but what he did tell me caught my ear. He claimed to be from Nazareth originally. He also mentioned a woman named Delilah who stabbed him in the back a long time ago, and knew Mary was too frightened to be talked to due to the circumstances of her surroundings. And Lisa, well, I'm not talking to her again. Kind of pointless considering she's technically 6. I had just left Bob. Bob, still claiming to be an investment banker from New York, didn't provide much information on the doll, so I changed the subject. "What's with the coins?" "Oh, these." He pointed to his bloodied sockets. "They're my lucky coins." "Yeah, whatever you say, Bob." I returned to my office and poured a cup of coffee. I nearly had a heart attack when I turned around and saw that doll sitting on my desk. It was not there when I came in. Pinned to its chest was a note scribbled in crayon. It read simply, "Look up." I do not know why, but I followed its instruction. On the ceiling, looking down at me was me. The person was duct taped to the ceiling. His eyes were gouged out, and carved into his forehead was another message. "Stop." I blinked, and the corpse and doll were gone. I ran to the monitors, and saw the doll back in Lisa's cage, looking directly at the camera. I'm starting to think this isn't worth $500 a day. Sorry about the wait. On a busy few days since Bill slipped out of his skin. Speaking of which, it's still undetermined whether or not Bill could be considered the same being as whatever crawled out of his skin. Some of you suggested I tell TD, and I very much intend to, just have other things to deal with. Also, there were no transfers today, which is weird, considering it's happened every 3 days for at least a decade. I've been having trouble sleeping. Every time I shut my eyes, I see that doll. I've even seen it around my house, which is worrying to say the least. I've done more interviews with the inmates, so as I can put it together, here's what I've gathered about who or what these people are. Fred was born, according to them, around 1836. He also claims to have committed several murders since the 1880s, several victims, including 2 in the December of 1968. He cites those as his favorites. He's nearly 200 years old, by his own count. Mary claims to be a nun, a woman of the cloth. She said she was born in 1883 and did what she did for the Lord. Apparently, she'd convert the wealthy in order for them to give their money to the church. She also said she's no Catholic, but a Greek Orthodox. Chad, I gave a notebook to communicate with. Below is said interview. Why are you here? Chad wrote troubles with women. We've all been there. I followed up by asking where were you born? What year? His response, I was born in Burlington, Vermont, 1946. He certainly didn't look that old. I thanked him for his time, gave him his green liquid, and moved on. Finally, we have little Lisa. Lisa insistently claims she was born in 1681 in Massachusetts. She also said she misses her cousin Betty. That's all I got out of her before she returned to her coloring book. It doesn't faze me that she's easily the oldest of the bunch. Hold on a second. I just saw something in the camera. It's much bigger than the cages. It's maybe about 7 feet tall. It's completely devoid of hair or pigment. What caught my eye, however, was the oxygen tank on its back. I'm looking at number 8. I quickly pressed the alarm button and looked back up at the camera. Its face was right in the camera, and it was definitely the face of Bill, grinning ear to rotting ear. Even in the camera, I could tell how decayed its teeth were. The feed cut out, and then the power. A couple of seconds later, the feed turned back on, but the lights didn't. I'm guessing that was an extra security measure. I grabbed the weapon at my station, locked the door, grabbed my security walkie-talkie, and waited, weapon aimed at the door. It had to be 4, maybe 5 hours before TD entered the room. The security team did show up, 2 hours ago in fact, but they had vanished without a trace. Missing? What do you mean? I said, feeling sleep deprived, even though I had plenty of sleep. They arrived on site and didn't check back in. Sighing, I scratched the back of my head. I've had it with this secrecy stuff. What are we keeping here? I finally asked, as TD studied the monitors. Monsters, he said, matter-of-factly, things that have to be dealt with by any means necessary. He paused. What's that in cage number 7? The doll. Yes, the doll. Where did it come from? It's been there for a few days now, since number 8 came in. Why are you telling me this now? He demanded, with a look of fear, and anger etched across his face. Well, I stopped myself since number 7 went missing, then number 8. I figured it rated low on lists of concerns. He sighed. The power was cut. There's a backup generator. Grab the gun and come with me. My superior ordered me. I guess I don't have much of a choice. I have to stop here for now. Not a good idea. To keep writing, what with the lights being out. Update, alright. I'm still alive. Well, barely. 4 of them have broken out, as is the thing I'm assuming at one point was number 8. Mary, Bob, and Chad are all under containment, by their own choice no less. The building is in full lockdown, and he ordered every available security personnel to come immediately. I intended to post this yesterday, but you know, life and death, monsters wanting to eat my bones, priorities you know. TD and I managed to restore power, but I can't leave. Not that I would go out to, with those guys out and about. I'm currently in my office with TD, who's watching the monitors. I've filled him in on the whole duplicate of me on the ceiling thing, and the doll. His walkie just sprang to life. I'm not sure, but I believe they said Cerberus is on site, doing a full sweep of Sector 6. We'll be at your position in 2 minutes. TD breathed a sigh of relief. Cerberus. Thank the Lord. What's Cerberus? I asked. They're what's gonna get us out of this. He grabbed his walkie. Roger that. Cerberus, we're in security room Foxtrot. Subjects are out of containment with the exceptions of number 4, number 5, and number 6. You have permission to terminate any of the others on site. Also, be advised, there may be 2 hostile entities with subject number 7. Terminate all on site. Roger that. Then there was radio silence. I kind of regret looking over as he grabbed it though, because I realize how tired I am, but I'm not crazy. TD's face wasn't there anymore. It was a mass of flesh and writhing muscles. 2 grotesque horns were burrowed in his forehead. As I blinked, his face had changed to the vaguely aged look I was familiar with. I have to go for now. Cerberus just arrived. But can any of you please tell me, What the hell was I just locked in a room with? You know, if I survive this, I'm asking for a raise, or actually lethal weaponry instead of rubber bullets. My job, up until last week, was watching people in cages, no questions asked. But then cage number 8 arrived, and now, I'm more concerned on getting out of here than performing my job dutifully. Cerberus is still searching for the escaped. We found what was left of the initial security response. They were mauled by something, limbs strewn all around, bite marks, that sort of thing. If I had to guess, I'd say Cassie or Bill got to them, initially anyway. The lack of blood suggests Fred as well, but he was never one for dismemberments. Did I mention the initial response was around 10 to 15 guys? Kind of important. Cerberus, meanwhile, is 4 men I don't even know their names. Their faces are completely obscured, and they wear riot gear. From what I heard, they go by codenames. W, F, P, and DD seems to be the leader of the pack. Despite there only being 4 of them, TD seems confident they'll round up or exterminate the others. Either way, I'm not so sure I trust TD anymore. Not after what I saw. I'm not allowed to leave. So in the meantime, I've been piecing together what's actually going on down here, which, to be honest, isn't going well. I'm still confused as to what these people are. Damn, I just heard gunfire. Update, alright, well that was something. They found Cassie. She shook off about 30 seconds of shots from assault rifles. She's back in containment, as they could do little more than incapacitate her. One down, I guess. TD has gone missing though. Cerberus sent F to watch me. Guess they don't trust the normal security guard. They're kind of assholes in all honesty. I'm really hungry. I asked F to let me get some food from the cafeteria area, but he denied it with a head shake and pointed to my chair. So I'm just writing now to clear my head. It's getting harder to concentrate if I'm being frank with you guys. I mean, wouldn't you be a little freaked out in my situation? At any rate, what really concerns me is our doll friend has showed up in my office. F doesn't seem to notice or care about it. Maybe 2D hadn't briefed these guys, or maybe I'm finally losing it. God, I'm hungry. You know what's funny? I can't remember anything before last Saturday, the day they added cage number 8. I should have guessed there was something up from the get-go, but the pay was so good and I needed the money. And for 10 years, it was relatively peaceful, you know. Relatively being the operative word. Or was it? I can't be sure anymore. Everything before last weekend is a blank. Stress will do that, I suppose. Simple job. Watch people in cages. Get paid $500. I need food. I haven't eaten in what feels like days. I'm not dying here. Update, I can't believe what I did. So I convinced F to let me go check on the contained subjects. Feed them. I took my weapon with me, just in case. And I was just so hungry, so I ate some of the meat we give to Cassie. Yes, I know, it's human, but I needed food. Okay, I ate yesterday, but I felt like I was starving. I needed it, more than that monster did. And you know the worst part? I liked the taste. I mean, it was raw meat, but it wasn't bad. Tasted sort of like pork, so I ate more. It wasn't until TD appeared out of nowhere that I realized I had been there for hours, gorging myself. I wasn't hungry anymore, but I couldn't stop myself. TD pulled me away from my flesh feast and told me that they had killed Fred. He didn't seem fazed by my actions, instead irritated that I had left my post. F wasn't there when I returned, but the doll was. And just like the other day, 2D didn't see it, even though he did yesterday. I asked as he turned to leave, "What are you?" He stopped. "Come again. What are you?" He raked his nails on the doorframe. As he stood in place, his fingers bled a bit. As he did, "I'm just a guy doing his job, same as you." That didn't satisfy me, so I hit him in the back of the head with my rifle. It didn't even make him flinch. He turned to face me with a look of horrifying calm. "You know, I liked you a lot more than the previous guard." The grotesque mass of muscle and flesh flashed in my mind, and I fell to the floor. The mask was gone, as was whatever this thing was, walked towards me. "I'm doing a job that was given to me, and I need help doing it. All you have to do is watch those monitors and keep your mouth shut," he said, but I heard thousands of voices scream it from within my mind. Do I make myself clear? His voice returned to normal. "You're a monster. I'll look at you." Finally figured that one out, eh? Well, not quite. I'm more like the monster. Lightbringer, Prince of Lies, etc., he said, with mocking amusement, lackadaisically gesturing with his hands. "Look, I'm not the bad guy here. No, in fact, I'm doing my best to keep them here, and for the sake of mankind, I suggest you do the same." He patted me on the cheek and left the room. I ran for the door, but it was locked behind him. So yeah, I'm working for the devil himself. How fun. Should have suspected that from the beginning if I'm being honest. I'm going to get some sleep. I'll update you all later. Update: I woke up to more gunfire. They found Earl. His normally short hair was longer now, and he had no issues shrugging off bullets. In fact, he broke a gun over his knee. At least that's what I heard over radio chatter. They have restrained him via horse tranquilizer, cut his hair, then locked him back up. That explains the hair tonic rule. Lisa and Bill are still missing, but I'm more concerned with getting out of here at this point. I managed to pick the lock. I always keep a bobby pin on me. What can I say? I'm a bit paranoid at this point, and I'm going to lift the lock down at one of the exits. Here's hoping I make it. Update: alright, figured you guys would like me to keep you updated. I have my phone with me for that very purpose. If I know this building well, I should be able to find the exit. Cerberus is patrolling for me. At least, I think they are. I saw more security staff coming in with equipment. Managed to hide out of sight. My only option is going out the exit. They take out the people they take away. I'll update later. I found it, and I wish I hadn't. I really wish I hadn't. The door they take people out of. There were stairs behind them. The stairs descended far below the building. The smell of sulfur was overpowering, but I decided it was my only option. I had been spotted by one of Cerberus, so I ran through the door. I still hear them trying to get in. The dark pit was seemingly endless, but as I got lower, after hours of walking, I heard it. Screams. Millions upon millions of screams of agony. And the heat. Jesus Christ, the heat. Like the fires of hell, which coincidentally, I do believe that's what it was. I tried to turn around, but a grip like a fiery hand grasped my ankle. It tried to pull me down the remainder of the stairs, but I managed to slip away. I ran as fast I could, back up the stairwell, which they did not come down after all, so I had descended for nothing. I went back through and found the building, seemingly long abandoned. The walls were covered in long dried blood and scorched marks. The hell, I had come through the right door, hadn't I? I turned to leave, but the door had vanished. I heard a voice behind me, going somewhere. I turned and saw TD, smiling ear to ear. "Come on, follow me." "Where are we?" "Just another of our locations." With significantly less success, I followed behind him, and I noticed the mask had slipped more. His entire left arm was covered in burn marks, and his shirt was torn, revealing 2 scars on his back. His face was now continually shifting, much more noticeable than ever before. Gone was the aging movie star looks, and I just felt pure darkness radiating from him. Think of me as someone who's disciplining some particularly mean children. They were naughty and broke the rules, so I gave them timeouts, he said, his voice deepening with every syllable. "Oh, and don't think I don't know what you've been doing. You've been breaking the rules yourself, haven't you?" He snapped his fingers, and we were back in my office, in the normal facility. He finally spoke. "We found number 7 and number 8. Once we capture them, you're free to leave. You're going to help." I followed TD to a room. On either side, blood and entrails coated the room. Security teams ripped apart. In the center of the carnage was a 6-year-old girl and a monstrous creature with an oxygen tank on its back. Then everything went black. My job was I watched people in cages. 7 cages, 7 people, each with different rules attached. My boss was a guy named TD. Now, there's 9 cages. One of them is empty. The 9th cage holds a male occupant. He's about 5'8". He's to be fed cooked meat and water daily. Furthermore, he's allowed daily internet access for 1 hour. The cages are a bit cramped, but you get used to it. I used to watch people in cages. When Sammy got sick, it was like stepping into a dark mirror world. We'd been economically well off with our 2 full-time jobs and child-free lifestyle, so to suddenly step down to a single income was a wake-up call, not to mention how the insurance companies managed to weasel out of paying for more than half of Sammy's treatment. Disgusting. Sammy swung for the fences. She took it all in stride. We had our ups and downs with every doctor's visit, but we always ended up taking steps back rather than forward. There was always next time, they said, but we figured we were quickly running out of next times. 1 year down the line, Sammy was on a downward spiral. By then the catastrophic had turned tragically mundane. I did everything I could to keep her spirit up, but at that point, her light was faded. We barely spoke anymore. A work friend of mine, Barry, was having a bachelor party. He was pulling out all the stops. I was never planning on going, but Sammy insisted I should. You need to get out of the house for a bit, she smiled. Do something normal for a while. I protested, but seeing her light up for the first time in weeks was enough to break my guard. She was so happy to see I still had friends out there. How could I say no? I agreed to be the designated driver. I wouldn't be gone for more than a day, and I'd just be a phone call away. Sammy didn't seem to need that kind of reassurance. It was mostly for me. This was in November. Barry was having a December wedding and wanted all his pals to come along for one big night. Sure, I was just a work friend, but when you're in your mid-30s you gotta take what you get. Friends wise. And Barry certainly took what he could, inviting no less than 25 people. So in mid-November, I packed my bags and stepped on board a party bus heading for Annapolis. There were drinks and dinner at the hotel, then a few hours of losing money on the craps table. I gambled away about $200 at the roulette table, but magically won about $600 playing blackjack. After months of losing battle after battle, it felt good to finally win. I gotta admit, I was getting into it. Not as much as Barry's best man Jake, the guy wearing goggles, who spelled out boobs, but hey, that's hard to top. What a legend. Once it became apparent that there'd be no need for a designated driver, I just went along with it. 5 shots of mint schnapps later, and I started feeling a bit guilty. I called Sammy, but she laughed it off. It's good to hear you slur, she said. You're a fun drunk. Most of the night went by in a blur. More drinks, some dancing, lots of cheering for our main man Barry. Flashing lights, people pulling us back and forth between dance floors, bars, and wandering the streets looking for a taco truck. I clearly remember sitting on a park bench at one point, listening to one of Barry's friends lecture me about roasted seed snacks, something about antioxidants and digestion. I only remember the noise of it. I ended up back at the hotel. Jake had rented Barry this huge room, and 12 of us had made it all the way there. The after party and the night was far from over, because of course, there had to be exotic dancers. I crossed a line by getting completely ass backwards drunk, but that's about as far as I was willing to go. I gently but firmly declined to partake in any dancing. Instead, I retreated to the back of the room and enjoyed a cigar. Not a habit I'm very proud of, but it's one of those things my old man taught me to appreciate. A good cigar, a whiskey on the rocks. Hell, a man might forget his troubles for a while. Sometime after them replaying Pour Some Sugar on Me for the 6th time, the party was dying down. Some people were heading back to their rooms. Some did so with the company of a dancer. It was a wild night, but like most parties, the music dies, and at 3 in the morning, I was ready to let it. There were only 4 of us left by then. Barry, Jake, some guy named Ramsey, and I. We'd all crashed on a couch, telling stories about our wives, or in Barry's case, his wife-to-be. It was a wild party, but it was clear the guy was in love. Thought to respect that. Then a stranger walked in, at least 6'7", body like a scarecrow, wore all black, except for a white shirt, white hair slicked back and combed. He had the most intense blue eyes I'd ever seen, like he could look straight through me if he wanted. I see you gentlemen are enjoying yourselves, he smiled. I'm guessing the girls didn't disappoint. They most assuredly did not, hiccuped Jake. But we're married men here. Oh, I can tell. If it wasn't for the cigars, all I'd smell and hear is virtue. That got a chuckle out of us. Jake introduced him as Tom, or Stranger Tom. Apparently, he was the kind of guy you talk to if you wanted to have a good time anywhere from Pasadena to Kent Island. He co-ran several clubs, and he was an enthusiastic movie entrepreneur. I only had to see the color of his business cards to know exactly what kind of movies he made. Classy stuff. As we started winding down, our discussion drifted into a more philosophical nature. Barry kept saying how much he hoped this marriage would be the one. Jake was worrying about his youngest kid not making it through college. Ramsey was on the verge of crying, talking about his sick dog. And me, well, I didn't want to say anything. I didn't want to think about real life for a while. Stranger Tom took his feet off the coffee table, spilling an ashtray on the floor. He brought out this intricate silver lighter engraved with a crow and a pair of sunflowers. "Let's imagine, if you would, that you could get answers to all those questions," he said. "If you could know what things would look like with your wife 20 years down the line. If you could get a hint how to push your boy to the finish line, or how you could find just the right person to help your darling pooch make it just a little longer." "Yeah," grinned Barry, finishing the last drops of his drink. "That'd be worth something, wouldn't it?" "Sure would," nodded Jake. "Well, how about it then?" Tom flicked open his lighter and the steady blue flame shot out. Small, but bright as hell. It didn't flicker. "It'll cost you, but you'll get what you want. Price varies on the scope of the question. Is this like a party trick?" "Like a Luigi board," chuckled Jake. The guys laughed. I couldn't hold back a snort myself. "Ouija board," Rancy corrected. "Luigi is the Mario guy." "Whatever. Tom, is it like that?" "Nah," Stranger Tom smiled. "I assure you, it ain't nothing like that." He turned his attention to me, eyeing me up and down. There was this strange smile on his face, and the man never seemed to blink. Even then, as drunk as I was, I could tell he was creepy as shit. "I'm good," I smiled. "You guys go ahead. Surely, you want to know something. Something good." I looked down at my empty glass. Tom was getting on my nerves. Playing on the worries of drunk people is one of the lowest ways to trick someone out of a cheap buck. Reminded me of a televangelist, but without the promise of paradise. "Sure," I nodded. "I'm calling you out, Tom. I want you to tell me the color of my lucky boxers. The ones I wore at my wedding. That's it." "Fair enough," said Tom. "Now take a good hard look, and just tell me one thing." We all focused on the silver lighter, with the little blue flame, unflickering, steady like an oil picture. "Do you submit?" he asked. We did. It all happened in an instant. This one loud snap, like a choir of carrots breaking in unison. Jake's right arm fragmented in 3 places. I could see bone poking out in different directions, breaking through the skin. Rancy's jaw snapped, and 3 teeth rolled out of his mouth, tapping against the side of the table. As they tumbled across the floor, Barry's left leg seemingly exploded, cracking wide open from ankle to hip. And me, a sting on my index finger. Nothing more. For a second, there were no screams, just these blank stares. As we were drawn into the blue light, there was no panic, no agony, just realization. "Yes," said Jake, in perfect clarity. "Yes, that's how. She's still beautiful," muttered Barry. Ramsey tried to talk but ended up slurring with his broken jaw. Blood-mixed spit poured out of the corner of his mouth, along with 2 more teeth. I sat there, looking at these 3 broken men as Stranger Tom lit a cigarette. It was like 3 puppets who'd had their strings cut, talking out loud like wind-up dolls. Tom held the lighter aloft, keeping the blue flame bright and steady. He looked me dead in the eye, his smile growing wider. "They were red," he said, "with little white petals." He closed the lighter, and our collective consciousness went out along with the blue flame. Waking from a dreamless sleep, I remember screaming. It stank of blood, and I could see dark brown spots across the floor and furniture. There were 2 EMTs giving Barry chest compressions, and someone lifting Jake out of his chair. Rancy was nowhere to be seen. It was bright outside. Someone was trying to get me out of my chair. "Make room," they yelled. "Get out. Is he dead? Oh my God, is he dead?" I leaned against an unknown hotel staffer as she helped me out of the room. The second I was out, the hangover and chalk buckled me over. I hurled all over the carpet. The hallways were covered in confused guests. As a flurry of people rushed past me, I only caught a glimpse of Barry's arm. It was white as snow. I had nothing but a bruise on my index finger. It was chaos. EMTs running back and forth, screams in the hallway and the rooms. Someone just kept yelling what's wrong with Barry, over and over again. My heart was beating so fast that I could barely hear it. Stranger Tom had been absolutely right. My lucky boxers were red with white petals. I got them for my wedding day, and they always managed to bring Sammy a smile. They were just this bright reminder of happier days, so of course, they were lucky. But I couldn't stop staring at my index finger. I'd asked a small question and paid a small price. Was it that simple? Was it real? Really real? Barry's fiancée promised to inform us as soon as she heard something about his condition. One of the other guests offered me a ride home. One by one we left the town in silence. All the while, I couldn't stop thinking about that tall man with the silver lighter. By the time I got home, Sammy had already heard the news. She hobbled all the way to the front door, almost dropping her cane as she flung herself at me. I wrapped my arms around her, feeling a tinge of ache in my finger. "Thank God you're okay," she sobbed. "They said it was an accident." I didn't want to worry her. She had so much on her mind. As it was, "I don't know, honey," I lied, kissing her head. I was out cold. The next few weeks, I got a lot of updates. Barry had started to recover. Jake was so messed up they had to amputate parts of his lower arm, along with 2 fingers. Ramsey had to drink his dinner for the foreseeable future, but he was doing better. I tried to put it all out of my head. I had more immediate things to deal with, even if that blue flame haunted my nightmares. I sometimes imagined Stranger Tom sitting at the edge of my bed, asking me if there was anything I liked to know. And of course there was, but this was madness. There's no such thing as wandering prophets and soothsayers. But when I saw an Instagram post of Ramsey hugging his dog, something ached in my heart. Maybe it was all real. Maybe I'd missed a real, actual opportunity. In early December, Sammy took a turn for the worse. Her parents were over every day to help out while I was at work, trying their best to get her to her various appointments. The doctors had all but given up, but were determined to finish the treatment nonetheless. Then came that one day. I'd forgotten about doing laundry and only had a single pair of underwear left. My lucky boxers, red with white petals. Putting them on, even then, brought a smile to Sammy's face. I decided that I wouldn't let the mundane win. I wouldn't wait for the worst to happen. I took time off work and went to see Jake. Jake was still on sick leave for his broken arm. I met him at a cafe downtown, and we got ourselves a couple of bear claws. Without the boobs glasses, he almost looked like a person. We small talked about Barry and Ramsey and how they were doing better. Jake talked about his arm and how the two of us lived through the wildest nights of our lives. Then he took a long look at me. "You really do have red boxers with white petals, don't you?" he asked. "I got a pair, yeah." He nodded, taking another sip of his steaming hot coffee. He looked out the window with a sigh. "My boy is doing better," he said. "Turns out he's got an eye condition. Gave him migraines, so he's doing better." Night and day, Jake smiled. "It's nothing short of a miracle." There was a pregnant pause as we just nodded at one another, drinking our coffee. Finally, I bit the bullet. "Jake, I'm gonna need the number to Stranger Tom." Jake tried to help as best as he could, but it turns out it wasn't quite that simple. He'd met Tom through a friend of a friend of a friend. Backtracking wasn't as easy as it seemed. Jake gave me the number to a guy who worked at the casino we'd been to. That guy, in turn, directed me to a nightclub manager up in Hallethorpe. It took me 2 days of emailing, texting, messaging, and unwanted calls to finally get to a clear lead. A dancer over in Ferndale told me she could set up a meeting with him for a price. It cost me all my blackjack winnings, but I finally had a time and address. Some guy who'd won the lottery had rented out a strip joint. Guess who their host was? It was a Friday night. When I drove out there, the place was rented out and closed to the public. I slipped the bouncer a $100 bill, name-dropped the dancer I'd talked to, and promised I wouldn't cause any trouble. That did the trick. The party was going strong. Explosive music, dim red lights, smoke, champagne, and sweat. Clinking bottles accompanied by cheers and groans. Not too different from a certain bachelor party. I could almost feel the champagne bubbles tickle my nose. And there, at the bar, sat none other than Stranger Tom. Walking up to him, I felt my heart sink into my stomach. This might be one big Hail Mary, or I could be the dumbest man on the entire East Coast. Tom turned in his seat, sliding a shot of whiskey my way. He didn't even look up. "I knew you'd be back," he said, throwing me a side eye. "You have questions?" "Just one. It'll have to wait," he smiled. "I got business." He turned to face the partygoers. He raised a glass to them, getting a handful of cheers in return. Tom spoke under his breath, never dropping that unnerving smile. "Clown monkeys." As he turned, those piercing eyes dug deep into me. They seemed different now, stronger, angrier. I could have sworn they moved, like fire. "I don't usually let people ask me twice," he said. "Then again, most don't want to." "It's important," I said, "and I'll pay the price." "Oh, I'm well aware. You come chasing me down. You gotta be hella desperate. Drink your whiskey. I'm good." I wasn't asking. My heart skipped a beat. I chugged it, letting the liquid fire sink into my throat. My fingers tingled, and I could imagine the ache of my index finger, just that tinge of pain with promises of more to come. Stranger Tom turned to face the bartender, ordering himself another shot of whiskey. "Who are you?" I asked. "How do you do what you do?" "I'm no one," Tom said. "Who cares? So you won't tell me." He held up his glass, letting the liquid reflect off of the colored lights. Suddenly, his silver lighter was on the table. I never saw him reach for it. It just sort of appeared. "I come from a land of a watchful red sun," Stranger Tom grinned, "where the snow is feathers and the shores are silver black, where all the flowers have choked to death, turning a sickly blue." He tapped his lighter, like my fire, while Tom slipped from table to table, refilling glasses and lighting cigarettes. I stayed at the bar. After a while, it all looked the same. Men, women, dancing, sitting, it was all just meat, sweat, and fabric. Wedding rings reflecting the burst from a strobe light. Memorial tattoos grinding against exposed chests. My phone buzzed, and I knew it was Sammy. I couldn't bring myself to read it. 1 past midnight, I'd fallen asleep at the bar. I woke up as one of the girls wished the bartender a good night. Looking up, I saw Tom waving me over. Most of the place had cleared out, just a handful of guys left. Tom had the seat of honor at the edge of the table. There were traces of questionable powders right next to puddles of spilled mojitos. "You think there was ever life on Mars?" someone asked. "That's messed up, right? Like, if there was?" "Yeah," another agreed. "Like, all the way over there. What is that even like? What does it mean for us?" Stranger Tom gave me a knowing look. "Sounds like you gentlemen are a curious lot." He smiled. "Now, let me present a hypothetical." He gave them the same speech as we'd gotten. Made it sound fun, kind of like a drinking game. Our biggest, deepest questions, all for a spooky little price. A deal with the strip club devil. One guy just asked for the name of whoever stole his pickup. Another tried to be a smartass, asking for the article number of a replacement drip pan for his fridge. They took turns asking these insane, childish nonsense questions, and I just sat there, sweating. Then there is this one guy, this one drunk asshole, that chimes in. "I want to know what God looks like." He grins. "Wouldn't you guys like to know?" "That's a big question," nodded Stranger Tom. "One of the biggest." "Yeah, well, I want to know," the guy repeated. "Don't you guys want to know?" They did. They all did. I tried to chime in, a word here and there, asking them to reconsider or go back to their earlier questions. Hell, I even tried to suggest calling it a night, but it was too late, and Tom had already brought out his lighter. His eyes were brighter now, hungrier. He was thriving. I wanted to do something more, something drastic. If asking what a marriage looks like 20 years into the future rips your entire leg open, what does asking for the face of God cost? I made a plan in my head. I was gonna head for the bathroom, maybe pull the fire alarm, or maybe get everyone a round of drinks, stalling for time. But when I saw Stranger Tom's grinning face looking down on me, I knew it was too late. "Don't you want to ask a question too?" he asked. I swallowed my pride, feeling the salt stick to the side of my throat. It burned worse than the whiskey. I nodded. "I want to know how to save my wife." I got a few strange looks from around the table, but Tom just smiled. "That's a big ask." He grinned. "A real big ask. Can you say help?" "Oh, I can." He nodded. "And I'm sure Sammy will be just fine." Looking back at it, I was just too nervous to notice, but I never told him her name. He flicked open his lighter and lit the blue flame. It felt like the bulbs in the room started to dim, like the music faded away. The static buzzing in the overhead speakers grew louder. Then looked deep into the flame. "Gentlemen, look deep and answer me this." His eyes flickered. The flame didn't. "Do you submit?" And they did. I closed my eyes and held my breath, waiting for the pain to come. Seconds passed. Then a whisper. I love this part. The man across from me unfurled. That's the best word for it. Unfurled. From his fingertips and up, the very bones of his body started to come undone, like they were escaping his flesh, turning themselves into needles, puncturing him from the inside out. As his skull fractured, twisting his musculature into a parody of a human smile, he started barking nonsensical words, something from a dead language, long since unheard, all with perfect clarity and pronunciation. As his bones broke apart, smattering like a box of firecrackers, whatever he saw was enough to drive him to an eldritch madness. In that last moment, to view the face of a god. He smiled. Blood and tears streamed down his face. His neck broke in a snap, along with his spine and hip, twisting his body into an impossible shape. The others panicked. One guy fell backwards, out of his chair, as his body split open on the floor. Another headed for the emergency exit, but didn't even get halfway before his legs burst like popcorn. They screamed with the last of their wit. One of them crinkled in on himself, like crushing a sheet of paper. One had his ribcage split open, folding him inside out like an empty pocket. It wasn't a yelp of pain, it was ecstasy. Stranger Tom stood up, soaking it all in, without turning his eyes from the chanting mounds of broken men. He spoke out loud. "Yours will be worse," he said. "They wanted to see something. You want to save a human life. You know what that's worth." He towered over me, his eyes literally crackling with a blue flame. To preserve the infinite potential of a life, the immortal form, created in the image of those who begun. He laughed. He laughed like it was the best joke he'd ever heard. He laughed until there were tears streaming down his cheeks. "You're going to suffer so many times over." He held up his lighter and put his finger on the lid. "Thank you," he smiled. Flick, images rushed past me. A beach of silvery black, white feathers falling from a clear sky, an endless, waveless ocean, and above, a bloodful, lidless eye ever peering into the cracks of our being, lending the world, growing larger in my mind, sucking me into a thoughtless everything. And at the end of a breath, the answer was clear to me. I'd had the cure all along. A few weeks down the line, Sammy was going to make a miraculous recovery. After 100 steps backwards, she was finally taking a step forward. It was bound to happen. It was always going to happen. Her hair and smile would grow back, and by spring she'd be sitting next to me feeding ducks at the pond. And now I was going to die for nothing. I came to, being held aloft by Stranger Tom. He panted like a hungry dog, his eyes fully blackened, with blue embers flickering impossibly deep in his skull. His teeth had grown sharp and predatory, revealing a white maggot-like tongue. He snickered with anticipation, staring into me. "No," I stammered. "No, it's not." The last chance of Io had died, reduced to a single wheezing cough from the final man with something that could resemble a face. Stranger Tom's smile faded. He turned his head to one side, frowning. You're not saving her, are you?" "No, she's going to make it. On her own." "God damn it." He grasped my neck with one hand and threw me to the floor. I tried to fight him off, but it was like pushing on an oak. I was looking forward to that one. "I'm aching for it," he groaned. "And I get nothing. Just No," he spat. "I'm not getting much, but I'm gonna savor this." He let me go and stepped back. 100 thoughts rushed through my head. Pleading, cursing, crying, screaming. It all just turned into this whining noise, meaning nothing and everything at once. Tom bore down on me, furious. "Give me what you owe." Then a crack and darkness. People tell me the place went up in flames. I think he set the fire, possibly to cover the tracks. It was easy enough to blame the partygoers. They didn't particularly care for fire safety. I remember swirling smoke moving overhead as someone dragged me by the legs. And in that moment, that infinite second between life and death, I could see it. That big red eye in the sky, peering down at us, infinitely far away, and enveloping us at the same time. For those who ask, I was just going to a party I'd been invited to. That's the official story. There was a fire and a beam fell, gave me a minor spinal fracture, and knocked me out cold. You know that the fracture came long before the fire. The most magical irony of this whole story was just a few months ago. I was in bed, waiting for the pain meds to kick in, and Sammy was waiting for me by the door. "Can't sleep all day," she smiled. "We got ducks to feed." I wanted to share this in the faint hope that it prevents a tragedy to someone, somewhere. He's still out there, lurking at the edge of parties, listening in on drunken songs, waiting for his time to strike. When that lapse of judgment is just right, it really makes sense for the most basic of advice to help us, even now, to never, ever talk to strangers. Every room has an entrance. It doesn't have to be grand. It doesn't even have to be constantly accessible. Simply by its very definition, a room cannot be a room without a way in and a way out. Yet every rule has an exception. I've seen the exception to this one, deep within my house. So deep, in fact, that I have absolutely no idea where exactly this room is. but I know it's nearby. I've heard people inside, and I've even been in myself. Between me and my sister, my parents have 2 daughters. I was the last to get my own place, despite being the eldest by a year. My encounter with the room occurred only a few days after moving in. I wasn't doing anything in particular, I was just walking down the stairs. A perfectly mundane activity that we don't even think about, a means from point A to point B, but what happens when point C gets in between? When we stop paying attention to where we're going, where do we end up? Each step creaked gently below my feet, something that doesn't bother me, but it did seem particularly louder than usual on this occasion. Perhaps it took more of my attention than I had realized, because on that final step, I tripped, not enough to hit the floor, but enough to stumble and lose my balance. As I caught myself from my momentary fall, the house saw my temporary lack of concentration. The room changed. Walls of an off-white color surrounded me, with most of the paint cracking and flaking away with age. The floorboards were visible and rough. Even through my socks I could feel the points of wood painfully pressing my skin. The air felt thick to breathe. A musty, dusty smell filled my lungs. The room was bright, although missing any specific light source. It simply seemed to emanate from a thick, twisted, wooden pillar in the center of the room. In one corner, an old mattress had claimed enough dust to be unsleepable. Even if clean, it didn't appear very comfortable. Needless to say, I was more than confused. My mind instinctively wanted to retrace my steps, despite the fact that I couldn't have possibly gotten lost. This was my home, with one staircase. I turned around to go back. It took this long for me to catch on to the fact that the stairs were no longer there. In their place, nothing, less than nothing, even. There was no evidence of any way, nor out at all. No windows, no stairs, certainly no doors. My claustrophobia began to set in. My mind had stopped searching for an explanation, and was now only set on finding a way out, an impossible feat, caused by an equally improbable room. I felt my heart rate rise, and I dropped to the floor. Time felt like it was moving slowly. Every corner of my thoughts focused only on the walls around me. They may not have been closing in, but my fears were. As my knees hit the floor, they felt soft. They had landed on a gentle, almost woolly material. As my vision focused, and my racing mind calmed down, I realized I was in my hallway. Sunlight beamed in through the window, reminding me that I was free to leave at any time. I immediately went on a walk. I needed to feel the outside air. I didn't tell anyone about this at the time. In all honesty, I let it slowly sink into the back of my mind. After a few days, I no longer thought of it. I hadn't forgotten. How could I ever forget something like that? I simply pushed it away. That was until my sister found the room. Just 5 days after my encounter, she dropped by to visit and see the house for the first time. I told her I'd give her a tour. The house seemed to take that liberty from me. I specifically remember being in my bedroom, upstairs, cleaning some things away. She always had the cleaner bedroom as a kid, and part of me just wanted her to notice that I was more mature now, that I lived alone. I wasn't being loud. I would have heard the door if someone had knocked, I'm sure of it, but I never heard a knock. I heard her scream. It didn't echo through the house. It seemed to crawl up through the walls as a muffled noise. All around, her scream, even as I ran downstairs. Help, I heard her cry. Where are you? She sounded terrified. Where are you? I yelled back, repeating her question. I realized now that this wasn't helpful, and I never even answered her. But in the panic of the moment, I just wanted to find her. Somehow, even on the ground floor, her voice seemed just as distant as it had upstairs. I opened the front door and stepped into the garden. Only then did the sound seem to change. It was clearly coming from within the house. I turned back around, yet as I entered the hallway, I bumped into my sister. We grabbed each other. Where the hell was I? The question alone caused my mind to think back to my experience. I pulled away from her hug, now feeling equally as shaky. A room with no doors. Her silence spoke for her. She had seen it too. She began to explain. You weren't answering the door, so I let myself in, and I thought the place looked strange, but I thought nothing of it. Another example of being unaware of your surroundings. As I closed the door behind me, it just disappeared. I ran around, and then suddenly I bumped into you, and the room was gone. We sat down and I told her about my experience. We told our parents, but obviously, they just saw it as some weird ghost story. Spooky. Seriously, that was the first thing our dad said. The traumatic events were, simply by the nature of their absurdity, nothing more than a tale. His tune changed when he came to visit just a few days later. It didn't happen immediately, but it didn't take long. He had been sitting on the sofa with Mom for about half an hour. "Where's the toilet?" "Upstairs. First door you see. It'll be open." I felt slightly guilty. Deep down, I think I knew he would find the room. When he came back with a pale expression, I had my answer. My mom looked rightfully concerned. "You look like you've seen a ghost. Are you okay, dear?" She spoke gently. As she stood up to walk over to him, "He's seen the room," I explained for him. Mom's puzzled face showed that she wasn't exactly sure what I meant, so Dad finished the explanation. "The one with no doors." Mom, of course, experienced it too by the end of their visit. On their way out of the front door, Dad was holding her hand one moment, yet the next, she was gone. Like the rest of the cases, she returned a few moments later, albeit shaken up. Everyone who visits gets to see the room. There are no exceptions. Every single person who has ever visited my house has seen the room at some point before leaving. Then they are safely and promptly returned. What's stranger still is that it never occurs more than once. A single visit is all anyone ever seems to be permitted. Family members, friends, mechanics, delivery drivers that step just one step too far. If you step foot through that front door, you will be seeing the room. This has been true for 3 years, as long as I've lived here. It became almost charming. Last night, I met a guy whilst out with friends. He was nice, almost had a familiar sense to him. After chatting for a while, I told him about the room. "Oh yeah, very funny," his skepticism was showing. "I'm serious. Ask any of my friends here. They've all seen it." He didn't ask any of them. Perhaps he thought he'd sound just as insane as I did. "You're just trying to get me back to your place." I smiled at this thought and played into it. "Well, why don't you find out?" He came back to mine. He seemed to pause when he saw the house, looking pale. Already, I had never had someone look so frightened of the room. Before even seeing it, I told him that there was nothing to be afraid of, and after a moment, he apologized whilst following me inside. Once inside, his composure became calmer. He immediately told me he was going to use the bathroom. Without even asking where it was, he simply assumed it was upstairs and headed for it. Odd, I thought, but my mind was more focused on the upcoming witnessing of the room. I was excited to prove his doubts wrong. Strangely enough, he came back without having seen it. It takes some time for some people. "Let me show you around. The more you move around, the faster it'll happen." I gave him a tour of the house. When we reached the final door upstairs, my bedroom, he smiled at me. "Maybe it'll happen if we go in there." I smiled back, knowing his confidence would be humbled once he saw the doorless room. As I turned my back to him and opened my bedroom door, I felt his presence vanish. Turning around confirmed my suspicion. He was gone. Oh my God, the sound of his voice crawling up the walls. "Where am I? I told you. Believe me now." "Well, yeah. How long does it last?" "A minute, at most," I spoke whilst laughing. Yet every rule has an exception. A few minutes and I started to get worried. After an hour, he begged me to help him. "It's now been a whole night." His voice has stopped. The room had always returned people. Always. Why was this man the exception? I wanted to have helped him, but I'm not even sure where I would have started. Calling the police seemed out of the question. How would I even explain that the house had kidnapped somebody? I spoke to him all night, trying to help him find a way out, but we both knew he wasn't getting out until the house allowed it. Towards the end, he gave up. He started talking about how regretful he was. At the time, I thought he meant for visiting the house, but thinking back, I believe he meant something else. He kept talking about doing the wrong thing at the wrong time. The final words I heard him say before I stopped understanding him entirely were the most telling. "She's going to keep me here." Is he talking about me, or does he know something I don't? Researching my address further yielded an interesting development. He had been the previous owner of this house. Perhaps subconsciously, I recognized him, intrigued by his familiarity. I never met the previous owner before buying the house, but it can't be a coincidence. I must have seen him somewhere before. I also found an old listing of this house from a few years before I moved in. The original floor plan had a basement, something this house currently lacks. Could this be the room? A friend of his came by today to ask if he was still here. I explained that he had left in the night. His friend came inside. He never saw the room. The room with no doors has found its prisoner. It no longer takes visitors captive.